Warning. All opinions expressed herein are exclusively those of the artist behind the performance character known as the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. No disrespect is intended at anyone, individually or collectively, or at any particular intellectual property, title, or particular piece of content. I'm using my God-given free will and free speech rights to express my totally irrelevant opinion about this and any other media, show, content, product that I may comment on now, in the past, or in the future. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Almost Daily ZenCast presents the Incorrigible Mr. Zeppo's totally irrelevant media review of Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi. Now, you're in it, you're here, you've come all the way this far, and here you are, part 3. Let's kick it off with a little bit of Swimming Sinkhole Unconsciousness, a DJ Z track from the literary fictional album release called Master Droids, a remix live Gravity, audio entertainment asset live to tape performance by your favorite animatronic sidekick fictional character you've never heard of before, DJ Z. Dancing is not an inappropriate reaction to this robot electronic dance music from another dimension. There is no judgment, there's no shame. If you catch yourself doing a little chair wiggle, you go right on ahead. Hell, get up. Work up a little sweat. It's fine by us. There's a reason why DJ Z and I collaborate together to lovingly, animatronically, diligently provide this audio entertainment experience for the podcast and for your private listening pleasure over at soundcloud.com/Mr. Zeppo. Thank you, DJ Zed. Let's not give them all the milk for free and the cow, too. That was a bit abrupt of a transition. I apologize. I don't have an ear monitor to check it all, so I don't know if it sounded good, if it sounded harsh. But there we are. Sing Coal Swimming Unconsciousness. Incomplete. Currently a podcast exclusive. One of the songs that will very much in the not too distant future be making their singular auditorial debut over on the SoundCloud account. So keep an eye out for that. Go make your SoundCloud account for yourself and go support this DJ Zed robot in his efforts to break into the audio animatronic entertainment industry. All right. Speaking of which, me, myself, and I, your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa, would like to get back to talking about media and how it coulda, shoulda, woulda, mighta gone instead of how it actually went. Now, let me open by saying I'm really serious. Anytime I've apologized to or have asked the forgiveness of and or begged the understanding of anyone involved with anything I've ever critiqued ever, I mean that. Like, my sincerest apologies to George Lucas. No disrespect intended. These are just my totally irrelevant internal thinky thoughts and opinions about, as an audience, about how I felt about me experiencing the product that they provided for me to experience. Is it beyond the scope and domain of an audience's right to have an opinion and publicly disclose that opinion as part of their own entertainment content creation? I think not. I think is it exactly within the domain to do that sort of thing. So here we are, friends. And like I said, I say this with love. I am a fellow nerd. Dear fellow nerds, sci-fi nerds, fantasy nerds, action adventure nerds, movie nerds, please, please, please do indulge me in the following simple creative license. And that's that not only am I here to share with you my real life opinion about these real life movie properties or books or whatever it is that I may be critiquing in any of the segments of my experimental variety podcast talk show. I also hope that you'll extend this creative license. You'll recognize that this creative license I'm asking you to extend to me, it extends deep into the Zeppoverse itself. One of the reasons why I was earlier waxing fanatical, although I'm not a fanatic, about the Lego Movieverse, which is another way of putting it, right? Instead of cinematic universe, you can call it a movie universe or a film universe or an entertainment universe. The Lego brand universe gets to play with other brands really intensely in a way that sometimes kind of rocks my mind and makes me feel really FOMO-ishly jealous. Because one of the things that has yet to be displayed properly on any of the content available hitherto on Wattpad, for reasons that are simple, i.e. the stuff that's up there is me testing the waters with things that I've brought to enough level of polish that I could consider an almost final rough draft and that I can let stand for public reading. And as a sort of barometer take on, like, if this were the teaser, would people follow up with interest and be like, give me more? Or do I need to make changes, tweak it, learn from my experience, etc.? So it's been an experimental, clown writing a novel in a window on a typewriter in my head, presented on Wattpad as things go out on Wattpad. And the clown's not been doing a lot of typing. The clown is one of the me, myself, and I configurations that exist in my mind. Sort of like how in the to transfer abruptly to another entertainment property that I would love to do a full in-depth episode by episode breakdown, but I may not have the energy to do that, even though it's only 2 seasons long, is The Stewardess. Oh my God, I love that show. Oh my God, am I humiliated that I cannot remember either the character name or the real life name of the actress who performs the main title role and the many duplicate iterations of ourselves. But do I love the storytelling there? Oh my God, brilliant storytelling, amazing production value, epic, interesting exploration of the mundane dramas of human trauma in our postmodern society as expressed through an absurdist, magical realist lens that is rare and sometimes poorly executed, but in this case, perfection, which is probably not the way a French person would actually say perfection, but perfection. So to everyone there, and please forgive me, I don't have any of the names at my fingertips. I will forever, for the rest of my life, have this lady's face ingrained in my mind. I will recognize her at the drop of a hat. If some lady ever walks up to me on the street corner and bums a cigarette in New York and Hollywood and whatever, and it's her, I will recognize her and I'll be like, you, I know you. I mean, I don't know you, but I know your work. I can't remember your name from that show about the airline stewardess whose title escapes me. And she'll be like, the stewardess? And I'll be like, yes, that one. Brilliant work. I adore what you did. I adore you. You're amazing. Your face is forever ingrained in the back of my skull. Because your art was so well crafted. Like, I get a little emotional thinking about how beautifully she expresses emotion and pain and sorrow and grief and anger and outrage and humor and ridiculousness and self-awareness, something ever so rarely depicted, let alone discussed or explored or examined in pop culture TV. So this thing is not only a smash hit success as a bit of reinventing the entire murder, crime, procedural trope of tropes. It is, in and of itself, its own surreal, super cerebral, magical exploration of fundamental human catharsis, which is quite necessary and important to the human emotional health, both at an individual and collective level, if I may be so bold as to say. And it does something. It doesn't just give you the lip service of saying, and they learned from their mistakes and became a better person. It brings you on the roller coaster ride in an artful, beautiful, surrealist painting kind of way. You're like, wow, and you feel it and you live it and you recognize the analogy and the analogous moments in your own life, no matter how boring, how doldrum, and how innocent your life may be. You've gone through something that will touchstone here. And I don't mean, crazy international murder investigations. I mean the emotional journey of catharsis, which we not only get to see, we get to explore in a fun science fiction-y kind of way, and then be able to unpack and analyze and think about and discuss in public discourse in ways that before this show we didn't have available to us, because that's what art does, yo. Okay. The Stewardess, right? Is that the name of the show? Oh my god. If it's not the name of the show... No, okay, I rarely do this, but I have to. I have to go over to HBO Max, click on my widget to open my page. The Flight Attendant, look at that. In another universe, in a parallel universe not too terribly far from here, this show, or one very much like it, is called The Stewardess. And I apologize profusely. Maybe I thought of it as a joke and made it up and improvised my way into that. Maybe more quite realistically, I was being brutally honest with you about the way my brain works. Because, I shit you not, now that I can, look up her name. Wait, where's the extras bit? Where's the... Cassie Bowden, the character. Where's the part where they tell you, the cast of the characters and who they are? And... HBO Max, where is your page of information and detail? I want a cast, I want character breakdowns of who played what, and who directed it. I think maybe that's on each individual episode. Let's click through to episode 1. Boom. Okay, yeah, I'm I know I've seen this. I know I've stared at this. Cassie Bowden, Kaylee, I do not know how to correctly pronounce that, Coco. Cuco. Please forgive me. I'm also trying to be humorous about it, but I really also have no clue. And I'm only speaking directly to her for the aspirational hope that somehow, magically, my podcast will cross across her desk because the algorithm realizes that I'm talking about her and maybe wants her to know about it. Fingers crossed. But humbly, honestly, as a student of the craft that never made it, but thinks he did a decent job studying, You are brilliant. And I don't know if that means anything or if it lessens that I pre-qualified my opinion in that way, ruins it or lessens it, but brilliant. And I don't mean that sarcastically or in a pejorative way or in a mansplaining way. I'm humbled. You moved me to laughter that I didn't think I would feel at the end of a pandemic. You led me to cathartic weeping in a way that I didn't think I would be able to process at the end of a pandemic. You led me to deep, inspirational moments of awe about how artfitly you and your team, because I know you're also an executive producer, etc. Right? Aren't you? Isn't she? She's not listed in the producers list below. A bunch of other people are. Steve Yockey, Natalie Chadiz, Greg Bernard, Sarah Shooter, David Madden, Susie McCormick, Silvertree, who is also one of the directors of many episodes, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Jess Meyer and Bonnie M. Munoz. Please forgive me for any name I mispronounced. I'm terrible that way. English is not my first language. Technically, it's not even my second or third, but that's a whole nother story. I thought I saw and or heard and or read somewhere that the main actress who plays Cassie Bowden, Kaylee Koku, the most beautiful woman in the world right now, as of right now. No, I say that with admiration and love and to be funny. I thought she was an executive producer on the show. I want to believe in a universe where that happens to totally be the case, and then for whatever reason, HBO Max just didn't list her in the producers department. And if I'm wrong, I'm sorry for being wrong. I apologize for misspeaking. I'm not intended to do it intentionally or on purpose. But all around, brilliant. From conceptual work, obviously, from the design perspective, and I know this episode is not about this. I know we're going back to Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi, but I do want to contrast. Intellectually, to me, this somehow is powerful, is meaningful, right? Because I don't know what this is based on. I presume there's probably a book involved, because I remember somewhere in one of the intros, I tend to skip the intro once I've seen it once, unless I find it like addictively engaging. And for a topical reference, WandaVision. WandaVision, the skip title sequence button the skip intro button did not exist in my mind through the entirety of WandaVision. And whilst I absolutely love the design and concept and execution of the title sequence intro and the music of the flight attendant, and I love checking in on it throughout the season to see if it changed between, different episodes, season 1, season 2. I would occasionally indulge in skip it or be multitasking, packing a bowl during it. No particular reason. Love the art style. I have reactions to opening sequences in shows all over the place. Oh, quick shout out to Jeremy Irons as Jeremy Irons, the voiceover narrator, playing himself as the voiceover narrator, to get super meta nested about it. Jeremy Irons, in the intro to the quirky, fringy, weird, doesn't escape its own flaws, Mike Myers show, whose name I totally can't remember right now. The something of it. The Pentaveret. Plenty of things to say about the whole show there. Especially its final end scene and apparent messaging. But also some of the, content that gets included in its comedy that is, cringy. Jeremy Irons, just cut the rest of the show. Just the intro. If there was ever a show that you should, independent of watching it, you should go through the exercise of just watching the introduction and skipping to the next one, and watching the introduction and skipping to the next one through the whole season that's out right now. And just indulge in savoring in every brilliant moment of redonkulousness that Jeremy Irons is, as he portrays himself as a narrator, being himself, for this show. Go. Do it. If you got HBO Max, totally worth it. And then you can decide for yourself whether or not you actually watch the rest of the show, which is admittedly kind of very Mike Myers-ishy, because Mike Myers, executive producer, and plays 11 teen roles in it. It's classic Mike Myers to a certain degree. It's much better than I Married an Axe Murderer, which is brilliantly awful on so many levels, but also weird. And I'm not finished processing it. I need to watch it again before I get into analyzing it for reals for this show. But you can tell I already have some mixed feelings about it. It had some peak moments, that show, but the Pentaveret. And I'm really glad it came out, and then I binge watched it immediately. I'm sad I didn't do a show about it right away. But we'll see if we can fix that this next week, when I said I wouldn't do any mainline shows, and I'll probably just do media review shows this week. Okay. Where are we? When are we? Why are we lost? Derailed? Why are we talking about Pentaveret and Mike Myers? Much love, no disrespect. Oh, right. I wanted to open the show with 21 minutes worth of over-explaining myself about why and how and when I'm, expressing my opinion. I mean no offense, even if it gets a little harsh or snarky. Okay? So here we go. We played the music. We already swiped it away, right? We're already in. We're already in the midst of it. Without further ado, dear friends, the meaty chunk you've been waiting for, the part 4 of my review of the first episode, entitled Episode 1, Part 1. So I don't know if Part 2 is... I think Episode 2 is called Episode 2, Part 2, which that's bland and unsatisfactory. When it comes to naming conventions for a show, I'd like you to put a little thought into it. Don't make them so weird and abstract that I don't effing get it and it's just meaningless garbage, but, make it mean something, please. But I'm nitpicky. Here we go. Let's begin. Without further ado, I said. Okay, so I just got to the end of episode 1, and it felt longer than it needed to feel. They kind of ruined the cliffhanger they wanted to leave it on in terms of emotional impact. The last image of the episode, in my humble opinion, no judgment or hate to the creative team, actually much respect. A show of this scale and magnitude is ridiculously difficult, right? But, in my humble opinion, the final moment of this episode should have been that door closing on Princess Leia. The first time. With the sort of aha creepy moment of the second instance of it mixed in. Like if they had sort of restructured that first and second beat of the ooh, you're locked in a closet thing, so that the cliffhanger of this episode was more like the first, but with the character talking to her and telling her no one is coming. And so that at the top of the second episode, after a red herring something else look of something somewhere else, we could then cut to that moment with, oh, the robot, wake up the robot, try to escape. And that then gets crushed as the what happens at the end of the cliffhanger. Okay, so clearly I didn't introduce and contextualize things like a good critic would. But this was me just extemporaneously in the moment. I literally just finished watching the episode, as evidenced by the fact that a little tiny snippet, hopefully within the margins for grace in the law for infringement rights. I'm not, I just, again, my hand went hit record and then hit pause. And it's incidental. And it's proof that I'm literally in the hot moment of, it's a hot take that I'm giving you here. And this is now me live. Speaking to you on a Saturday morning, friends. It's May 28th. Well, it's now afternoon, quite literally. It's 12:07 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and I thank you deeply and humbly for tuning in. Did I just totally derail myself by calling it the date and time out and just forgetting what I was about to say? There was something I really wanted to say right then. The no disrespect part, right? I mean no disrespect to anybody, but here's my armchair critique. I didn't contextualize the moment. So I think that one of the strong suits of this show, one of the things that's going to be the cherished, beloved thing that wins people over about this show is young, adventurous Princess Leia, right? I don't know how much of young Luke Skywalker we're going to get, and conceptually, one could imagine only a scant amount from a distance, and that this is going to be a lot about Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi disappearing from the Skywalker orbit, from stalking the Skywalker family. Pardon me, I've got the hiccups again. In order to, fulfill his role that he's so dutifully and begrudgingly committed to doing, undercover kind of, sort of. We'll talk about that in a hot second as the recording proceeds. So there's that. I wanted to just lay that out. And I don't disagree. This Princess Leia character, as presented, is adorable. I really did feel strongly about how that cliffhanger ended. I think they created this. They fell into the same mistake that movies will fall into. A movie can have an internal cliffhanger, right? It's a premise that leads you to the false conclusion that the movie's just about to end, and then, something else happens. You know what is a brilliant example of that? And maybe this is why I went on a tangent just a second ago about the flight attendant, otherwise known as the airline stewardess in my universe. It's that bit at the end of the last episode, the whole 8th if I'm not mistaken, there's 7 episodes, right? And I did catch some after the episode commentary bits about the episode, and I confirmed my suspicion. I was already feeling this. Someone involved with the production calls this out and says, yeah, we literally sort of strived for this vibe. But episode 7 feels like the end of the season. And episode 8 feels like an episode-long surprise kicker with plot twists and surprises. And the plot twist at the end, no spoilers here, I'm just going to say, brilliantly played, well-timed, exactly not what you expect right when you get it. And also the show fulfills to do all the standard things we want from a show at the end of a season, which is tell us whether or not there's more fight to fight through, right? Like, this is not the end of the story, or this is a place that could be the end of the story because this is an episodic seasonal show, and we've reached a touchstone of fulfillment, right? Those are the two options I see for a season 2 of a show. Like, tell me there's more something to struggle through, more fight to fight for, more something that needs to be recovered from and bounced back from, etc. To synergize this with Star Wars and Star Wars deconstruction and analysis, there's a reason why Star Wars being one of the primary earliest examples of a well-executed trilogy that really worked, that redefined, disrupted the industry and redefined science fiction genre in and of itself, about science fiction and about the audience's relationship to story arcs. Episode 4, insert name of episode 4 here, whatever it's called. A New Hope is Broken, Hope Arise, whatever. No, I used to be able to prattle about these 3 movies inside and out, backwards and forwards, calling their names and then their titles by nicknames, as if I lived and breathed them 25 years ago. Today, not so much. Episode 3 is that A New Hope. Episode 2 is not Revenge of the Sith. It's Return of Star Wars, A New Hope, Return of the Jedi. No, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Oh my God, I'm embarrassed how long that took me. I'm literally doing a freaking Star Wars themed episode discussing the newest piece of legacy title in this long line, this now prolific line of of content, and I couldn't get the freaking subtitles to the first 3 movies right. And I mean, if I were sitting in a room full of Star Wars nerds, I would be getting ridiculed right now. And that's fine. That's real. As long as I'm not getting bullied, because that's what makes us nerds and not bullies. As soon as you start bullying someone else about some nerdy thing, then you're no longer a real nerd. Nerds stand together. We might use satire and what's the roasting of you a little bit. We might roast you a bit, but okay, I digress. Whatever I was saying is all interconnected and makes sense in the long run, even if I lose my train of thought. I try to believe. Some days I really, really, really dread revisiting old episodes where I know I got derailed a lot, but I don't remember what the hell I said. Because I'm like, oh God, what if it's just vomitous logorrhea of my mind, and it's truncated half paragraphs and meaningless sentences that trail off. But I don't think it is. I don't think an exponentially growing number of people in 25 plus countries around the world would continue listening to it if for 5 years that was all I was doing. Right? And when I'm feeling confident about myself, I know, and I will tell you to your eye. Like, if we met at a bar and you asked me, so like, what are you really doing with the podcast? Like, I'm doing a lot more than it seems that I'm doing on the surface, that's for sure. It takes a little bit of investment and time spent listening to it. And its many various themed subsegments and my various attempts at commenting about current events to really let it sink in. Because it isn't obvious as all that. Things connect. Dots connect. There's a cork board that we pin things to for a reason. And so let's pin all the things that we left dangling here in this little current diatribe of derailment, put them up on the cork board, and take a deep breath and dive back into whatever I was rambling about last night in response to this show. Because I'm pretty certain I'm about to lay into this show real specific about specific things while maintaining a balanced enthusiasm for wanting to watch it and appreciating that they made it. Let's find out. Part of me is like, I don't remember what I said. This is exciting. And I mean that. That's very real. That's very sincere. Like, I know the broad strokes kinda, but the specifics and where I may have derailed myself within my own spiraling talk about the show, who knows where we end up and how many times we'll have to pause. Here we go. In my humble opinion. And my other big question, it's a question, not so much a critique. I just don't know that it works. And it could have been anything else. But what is with the sushi desert factory carving up a giant dead flying sand shark? Like, what? It took me so long to wrap my brain around what that thing was when we first had the big flyover pan around scene. And then even when I finally went, oh, that's some sort of giant fish-like object that's dead and is either being archaeologically dug up out of the sand, which doesn't make sense because it looks like it's also kind of fresh, or it crashed out of the sky? Question mark. It's a flying shark thing. Is it a sand swimming shark fish that breathes air? Or is it a levitating, floating in the air shark fish that dies in the sand? I don't know. One of the reasons I laughed at myself there is that I meant to say breathes sand, and I said breathes air instead. Just thought I'd let you know. It would have been much funnier if I'd correctly said breathes sand, and then contrasted it with like one that flies through the air and I don't know what else what they would have been breathing other than air up in the air. Breathes rain clouds? There you go. That's a funnier take on that line. And that's the joy of being able to pause myself. Edit, erase, rewrite. But let us proceed. No more. I'm going to try to really minimize the interjections here. Let's try to power through at least a good 20 minutes of the 43 minutes we have left. Let's try to get through at least a good 10 minutes of the 43 minutes we got left before taking another interjection break. So that was just like, wait, what? And because presumably we do find out this is Tatooine. And one of the things I've never appreciated about Star Wars, like, updrafting, is when they try to put things that are new, and it's not because they're new that I don't like them, into settings we're already established in and already feel we know, but that don't make sense. Like, Tatooine, dry, desert planet. So the spice mining, which just felt a little bit too much of like a, hey, we're gonna do spice mining because they just did Dune reboot. That new thing was interesting because it fit in the world of Tatooine. It made sense in the world of Tatooine. The interplanetary space traveling fish head people, not so much. But then again, Star Wars has always been a universe where creature people are everywhere, and there's no explanation about any of it. There's just weird, creepy creature people, most of whom are really rather sweet souls that are just hideous creature people. Puppets, right? So, okay. Setting that aside. My one other question / critique is the Grand Inquisitor. When I see him coming out of the thing, given that the one teaser preview that I did see before sitting down to do any of this today showed him, and then immediately showed the aha reveal, apparent confirmation, because it didn't include the head mask visor thing, of the Darth Vader character being in the show, because they like attached his classic Darth Vader, what the fuck are those buttons, button plate thing that he classically has on the front of his costume that we don't understand and there is no explanation for. And that's the thing about buttons in sci-fi, like, that has always driven me nuts. I've always drawn a line, like, the finest of fine sci-fi knows what the buttons are and what they do and what they're about and why they were designed the way they were designed. And lazy sci-fi doesn't. But the problem is, some of the most beloved sci-fi has been in this category of things you can be really, really detail-oriented or kind of lazy about. Because there's plenty of categories in film production, television production. You know, the fabrication of practical set pieces that light up and do things, or are meant to look like they light up and do things, is not the core of any show. It's just a level by which you can get snarky about any particular given show. But I remember the good old days of watching, before I ever saw one moment of celluloid about Star Wars, I was introduced before we transition out of that, before we move on to this next rant, I want to make sure that I'm clear, that it is clear to everyone. I mean no disrespect to set builders and set designers and costume designers and all sort of that. I speak casually and kind of rough and tumble about these roles in entertainment because I literally am one of them, right? I am amongst them. I'm not a stranger outside of their world, scoffing and mocking and ridiculing or criticizing them without firsthand knowledge of what it's like. I've shed blood, sweat, and tears with designers and builders and engineers in theaters and on movie sets. Okay? No, I never made it. Didn't make not a penny's worth of money left over from any of those experiences. Didn't make any money worth bragging about. Didn't get recognized, didn't get picked up. And The lack of my success as an entertainment worker is entirely on me, as far as I'm concerned, right? Like, I made choices that were sort of comfort based, and I didn't go hunting it down with with as much fervor in the heart of the business. I live really close to LA, so close that if I'm anywhere else in California, let alone the United States of America or the rest of the world, if I'm traveling and someone's like, "Where are you from?" I just say LA, because I'm not going to go into the details of explaining just how remotely away from the core of LA City I am, despite the fact that there's no cultural difference between here and there, and that the townships between us are just endless effing hegemony. That's not the right way to pronounce that word, and that may not even be the right word I was trying to invoke. But it's just this. What's the word I'm trying to say? Uniformity. Not quite the right word. It's just this expanse of urban sprawl that might as well be all one big giant mega city. But I digress. This is not about loving or hating LA, because as a local Southern California lifelong resident, we love LA. That was a terrible refrain from that classic song. Thanks to what's his name at the piano, who brought it to us and gave us a sports and movie LA City theme song to take pride in, and et cetera, et cetera. When I said set construction is not the center of any show, I didn't mean that pejoratively or rudely or disrespectfully. I just mean in the full nexus of all the things that are the collaborative arts, because theater, and to a certain extent in its own way film, are very much a hybrid collaboration of some form of almost every other kind of art form. From sculpture to engineering. From if you want to call high-end mathematics and electrical engineering an art form, we can scope that too, because the electricians and keenly the designers and the master electricians that are responsible for this space gotta be on top of all that, and it's all part and parcel, right? Especially in the live theater performance venue industry. It's all done in a really weird, disjointed, disparate way. One would think, if you walked into a professional theater, that it was all one top-down, organization of a singular construction. But no, there's several sort of laterally related companies involved that do different things at times. But anyway, that's a whole nother round of discussion for a completely different episode. But a pin up on the board. Thank you for being here. Thank you for indulging me in my rambly length. Thank you for forgiving me whenever and every time I derail myself in my own thinking. I think I said whatever it is I paused the tape to say, and if I didn't, I apologize. And now we'll return to whatever it is we are about to transition to next in the tape that I recorded yesterday about my thoughts after watching the show. At a probably alarmingly young age to Star Trek. And I loved it because I understood it as television. I understood it as little tiny theater in a box that was photographed, right? And although I hadn't studied theater yet, I understood that they really weren't in space and that those things were all fake and that those weren't really computers, but they were meant to create the fantasy illusion of it. And I mean, maybe it helped that there's something about late 60s and early 70s television that, like, they really just cut all the corners and went as bare bones as possible on some of those shows. Maybe because sci-fi was new and was still being fought for by the women of sci-fi that broke ground. Thank you, Lucille Ball. If you don't know that connection, there's some research for you. Lucille Ball is directly, personally responsible for Star Trek being made. It would not have gotten made if it hadn't been for her intervening and saying, yes, it needs to be made. And I think she even brought it over to her own studio, if I'm not mistaken. Which I kind of realized, because as a kid, I saw that Star Trek, I mean, not that I was watching them in real time when they were first coming out, but in syndication, Star Trek was one of my favorite post black and white colorized, still retro era TV shows. I knew it was retro era. I knew it was from the not too distant past. I was well aware of all these weird contexts at an alarmingly early age. And the I Love Lucy show, which was the very first television show that I was sat down in front of an American television and told to watch because it would help me understand how to speak English. When I first got stranded here in this delightful continent, amongst all these bizarre but wonderfully human American English talkers, that was what happened. At any rate, I digress. Sci-fi, television, Star Wars, Obi-Wan. Wait, before I let myself end that digression, I totally didn't tell. That's a real anecdote from my real life, right? Which is also something that I've woven into the backstory of the Incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. For context, it would help anyone who's curious and interested and wants to enjoy the Zeppoverse and be part of the collaborative hyper-development of it as I present to you snippets and pieces as they come into their own fruition over on Wattpad. If you've never read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, go read it. Because there'll be a lot of weird sort of homage, tip of the hat pastiching and literary reference to that colossally brilliant piece of work. Truly one of the most important and one of the funniest multi-volume omnibus book publications, book series that is all one book, that you really should just buy as the all one book version of itself. Worth buying, of postmodern American literature. Like, I'm not shitting you. If you've never read it, you owe it to yourself to go get yourself an omnibus edition and read it. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Or is it the universe? I guess it depends on which timeline you're in. Whether you're on planet Earth, planet Boulder, planet Stumble Rock, the names vary. But what is his name? Where's my copy? I literally have a copy over here somewhere. I should. If it's missing, I'm gonna freak the F out. My bookshelf is directly behind me, and I'm not immediately finding it. And now I feel like a total dweeb, which is what nerds call people they're judging and belittling. The nerds, if nerds didn't like you in school, they called you a dweeb. That's worse. That's lower than nerds. That's who nerds picked on with their intellect. You're a dweeb because you were a nerd, but you were an outcast from the nerd society because you weren't smart enough to be a nerd. Like, real nerds were smarter than everybody else in the classroom. That's why the bullies and the jocks and the cool kids and the elitists and the in crowd and all the popular people hated us, because no matter what was going on, we had intellectually challenging things to throw at them. And they had fists. But I digress. I'm really weirded out that I don't know where my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy book is, because it really should be sitting right there. Or right there. There's certain spots where it would make real good sense to be. And if it's not there, it must still be in a box downstairs somewhere, which makes me sad. But let's stop branching off into infinity here with distractions. Very much like the character known as Ford Prefect in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, my character, the Incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, as played by myself currently and developed by myself currently on my own until I find collaborators willing to collaborate with me, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, openly recruiting people willing to work for free, of which I know I'll never find any, which is why I want to make my podcast turn me into a job creator so I can actually pay people a living wage to collaborate with me, instead of try to entice them to work with me for free with the promise of future profits, which, everyone thinks will never come true, will never pan out. Wow, I really branched off. That's not the sentence I meant to say when I started off. Very much like the character Ford Prefect, my character, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, has been stranded here on planet water in the northern island territorial structure of the North Americanas, here in the grand old 50 United States of America. In various ways, in various incarnations, in various parallel timelines, under various pseudonyms, in various instances and sort of cyclical repeats. It's sort of like one of the things I'm doing in my multimedia tip homage fan fiction integration of references, pop culture references, media culture references, character references, storyline references, plot references, which I very chaotically and disorganizedly baked into the cake everywhere without having any kind of masterminded plan about it, which will either prove to be my critical Achilles heel flaw or the virtuosity that brings whatever world building I do commit to paper to some interesting and appreciable level of uniqueness, one hopes. And also derails oneself in one's own thought. Rubber banding, collapsing the parentheticals. Stranded here, as I have been, feeling the alienation and discontinuation of my own through line in a sort of native home state, I really did get sat down in front of a television box wherein, at the time, because of hypersyndication, as we connect all the dots and stitch the tear back together again here conversationally, because of hypersyndication, was on for several hours at a time in big pre-scheduled viewing blocks. So my mother, who was vigilant of television for reasons never fully explained beyond the, there's stuff out there I don't want my kids watching until I think they're old enough to watch clause that every mother has the right to invoke, and which tragically fewer and fewer parents are invoking, because fathers, both parents have the right to invoke it. Hopefully they disagree. Hopefully they don't disagree and they find synergy and how to plan that out in the media consumption lives of their children, given that now every child expects to be handed a freaking mobile device supercomputer that surpasses television beyond the capacity of the parents to anticipate. Having said that, my mother really did sit me down in front of a good old-fashioned color television with a good old-fashioned actual tube in it with a knob dial that you had to crank turn. Made a deep, funny, weird clicking noise. And that also was accompanied by a strange, bizarre, like static, snap, transition, click noise of the channels flicking through, which I lovingly miss. All of that audio texture to the TV experience has been stripped away in the new high-def, high-resolution LED super monitors, super computing as screens, as television replacements. But that wasn't my point. My point was that in retelling that anecdote about myself and watching I Love Lucy, I really didn't drop into my storytelling mode and share with you the true anecdote in its full form, and I'm going to do that right now. So totally worth ballooning this episode out of control for. I may have to break out into an unexpected French fourth part. Pardon-moi. But if it is inevitable, it shall be done. So, my mother, being vigilant about content consumption, sat down and when we first got here, living in a hotel, looking to finalize the home search and lock it down as my dad starts his day job at the place that brought us here, because we didn't immigrate out of willy-nilly need to or want to or running away for horrible reasons, as many refugees might be doing today, but because we had been blessed with the good fortune that the national prestige brand company that my dad was sort of a mid-level accountant at was working an international deal to co-own, co-establish, and co-create their own American-based distribution company for the product that they created. And so being part of all that, he got the opportunity to have, our entire family sponsored for the supposedly righteous and appropriate and approved reasons that the right wing would say are the hoops that all immigrants must hope through. And yet I still, as an immigrant, have in my real life received a lot of hatred from people who don't like them immigrants, and yet claim to have some level of charity and respect and tolerance for those who do it the quote-unquote right way. But that's a whole nother fucking episode too. I digress. As immigrants, as a child that I think maybe had learned 4 words in English in school before, just as a way of being aware that there are other languages besides the native language that you were learning. As a sampler of many languages, not just English specific, I was suddenly challenged intellectually to master the English language vis-a-vis all the learning tools available at my disposal. And I Love Lucy was approved with my mother's loving seal of approval and genuine, hearty, almost witch-like cackling laughter full of joy every time we watched it together, every time she watched it by herself, every time she caught me watching it. Pig was genuinely, beautifully, redonkulously funny. Now, obviously, it will read incredibly dated. People will be perplexed should they suddenly slam that on one of their streaming services, and they should endeavor to try to binge watch it. It will make WandaVision make a hell of a lot more sense. Just that one show. If I were to recommend 3 shows to watch that will help you suddenly have a deeper, more profound appreciation for WandaVision, it's the shows that represent the pre-black and white era. Because I think once you get to the colorized era, it all starts to make a little bit more sense, and everyone's post-modern and contemporary awareness, even the post-Disney Channel generation, because there was a time, and I remember it, when there was no such effing thing as a Disney Channel. And besides my respectful love-hate relationship and former employment arrangements with Disney, which I must be full disclosure about, I have worked at the park. I have worked for the mouse. I've talked about it quite openly on the podcast before, I think on multiple occasions. So pin on the corkboard, play catch up, or revisit it for yourself if you already have logged it. I no longer work at the park, and I no longer feel beholden, but I do respect that, there's things I'm not going to talk about because I can reasonably cognate and use my brain and understand that falls within the purview of their rights protections, et cetera, et cetera. But critiquing their end product as a film critic, as a media critic, is a completely different thing. And no, I do not work for the mouse now. I do not work for any subsidiary of any multimedia corporation. I'm literally sitting at home, technically jobless, trying to bootstrap myself into the American dream vis-a-vis the internets as we've been sold to try and do in this near dystopian, because, dear friends, it is not dystopia yet. Brace yourselves for that hard pill, that hard realization. But that's a whole nother discussion. I digress. I reel it back in. Holy crap, we're almost at an hour, and we're not even 30 minutes into the original recording. Maybe we will very much indeed need to break off into an unexpected French fourth, which is a legitimate historical, theatrical trope from French theater. Not quite no one expects the Spanish Inquisition, but something I've always loved playing with because I love trilogies, and inherently when things happen in threes, there's a golden payoff if you manage a fourth just right. I'm not saying that that's what's happening here. I'm just saying that if this were a play, there would be a fourth beat to the comedic thing that is being talked about in vis-a-vis, like, should it become a French four? Okay, enough of that spiraling out of control, nonsensical nonsense. I don't even remember what we interrupted to comment on and why, but here we go. Back into the tape. Back onto the tape once more, my friends. As in, never mind. That one was, I shouldn't even bothered with that. I apologize. That was in poor taste, really. Here we go. The guy that they feature in the preview that is, it turns out, the Grand Inquisitor, and not, as I'm sure many of us incorrectly presumed, Darth Vader, after having partially recovered from the shenanigans at the lava pit, which always was just like, not that it happened that way, but the way it looked and the way it all played out and the dialogue was... I dread going back to watch that movie in particular, but apparently it's critical to all of this. Now, so bad call. What's with the weird skin coloration thing that competes visually, thematically with Darth Vader, and also, if I may point out, with Senator Palpatine, who goes from looking kind of normal and greedy and rich to grotesquely, hideously deformed by his evil powers in the blink of an eye somewhere, and then magically becomes... See, that's where I was really confused. In that other movie where he tries to indoctrinate that's after, right? That's not the same movie where at the end she gets to... It's a different girl. Okay. I need to clarify those for myself. And I never finished watching Solo either, the Han Solo prequel adventure. I started and it was like my second movie of an evening, and it was too close to bedtime and didn't make it. But okay, so that guy, the Grand Inquisitor, shoulda, coulda, woulda not looked like maybe a prototype Darth Vader? A little bit? Some kind of rank difference? What's with the weird, like I said, what's with the bleached skin? Is skin bleaching some hot new trend in the Star Wars future? I don't get it. With Darth Vader, it all made sense. With other characters in similar uniform, maybe there'll be an explanation. Maybe there will not be an explanation. That's one of the... When you zoom back far enough, and hindsight is indeed 20/20 vision, when you look at it as a connoisseur, admittedly not hardcore by the measurements of the hardcore community, of the Star Wars cinematic universe, it feels like it's kind of willy-nilly what gets explained and what doesn't, and when and how. Like, one of the groaner moments when they went suddenly into launching an explanation about midi-chlorians and how that's what the Force is, somehow. And then never talked about them again. Even though the Force is constantly brought up and or used. So, just weird. It's never been... The world building in Star Wars has always been broad, spectacular, but kind of thin in places. And a little, skating on thin ice. Like, if you knock too hard, it might shatter, tragically. But, that is by comparison, other sci-fi properties or stories are, specifically all about world building and creating lush, rich, deep environments. But I digress. It's still awesome. I don't hate it. I'm not an anti-Star Wars hater troll. I love me some Star Wars. I'm like a disappointed uncle that's like, I would never have raised those kids that way, and not my problem, not my circus, not my monkeys, not my place to really say, except that since it's media and art and not the raising of small human replicants, I have room to critique and lampoon a little and still love. You know what this first episode was missing? Pretty intensely? Since this is Tatooine, isn't it? A cantina scene. And although we did go to a cantina where there was a weird, awkwardly quiet, dull, un-Star Wars-ish bar scene. And by scene, I mean, not the film scene, but the scene at that bar. When you go out and hit the scene at night. It was just wait, what? That should have been the tip of the hat homage. How would I restructure all of this? First of all, no, wait, I have to interject and say, I realize right now, I was really absurdly overconfident about placing the cantina in Tatooine. That's probably not in Tatooine. I can't remember now if that cantina is like the last place they go before they leave Tatooine or the first place they go after they leave Tatooine. It's been too long since I watched the original trilogy, so I don't remember. 60-40, but like also oscillating back and forth between which side of the fence the 60's on. I want to say that I was right yesterday in saying that it wasn't Tatooine. Regardless, I do believe the Grand Inquisitor in yesterday's episode of Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi is on Tatooine looking for both whatever that new guy, Johnny-come-lately Jedi dude's name is, which I will not remember right now, and I'm not going to take the time to look it up. No offense, I just am terrible at names. Names don't stick, faces do. I can see the dude's face right now in my mind. And the weird, were they scarification marks or were they just tattoos? Was it supposed to be makeup? I don't know. Never explained. Was it because he's a Jedi that he had those markings? Was it because some tribal thing about his original race that's got nothing to do with the Jedis? No idea. The Grand Inquisitor looks like Darth Vader, has a weird, what the fuck is this? Since when do the Siths get tattoos? Because I thought Darth, what's his nuts? Not Vader, but the other guy. What's the red, horny devil Darth's name? Darth Sinisterus? Darth Luthien? Darth Vicious? Darth guy with horns on his head. I didn't think that was tattoos. I thought that was like, I am born with this shit on my face while you look at me, right? Am I wrong? I could be. I really don't know. But it's not my fault, right, that it's like that. The Star Wars universe has that sort of common loose thread of jagged, oh, you slapdash this shit together, didn't you? From the get-go. From the, oh, you're borrowing from Zen, aren't you, Lucas? Without really integrating it and without actually giving us any... Here's the thing. Let me back up. I love Star Wars. One of my most FOMOist realities, and I'm not someone who suffers a lot of FOMO, and I know I've been bringing it up lately, but in real life, about friends and their activities, very little actual FOMO ever. Sometimes I'll use that in a complimentary way to say, oh, that's so cool that you did that. But I'm not really ever like, oh my God, I'm jealous. I missed out on that. No. One of the rare occasions that this did happen was immediately before the official beginning of the pandemic. And I may have brought this up tangentially before when discussing COVID and the unconfirmable at this point, I don't know. Well, actually, unconfirmable by me without going to some expense. Potential that right before, during the holidays, Christmas, New Year's, and Boxing Day, like the days before the beginnings of the, oh shit, I think we're going to have a pandemic moment, I and my entire household of visiting relatives got sick. As like everyone was saying, like, this is the worst I've ever had the flu or the worst cold I've ever had in my life. And it was gnarly. And I always take a long time to bounce back fully enough to feel well enough and motivated enough and full of energy enough to go out into the world and do frivolous things. Work, I'll get back to as quickly as I humanly can. Self-entertainment, I'll pass. I'll recuperate long term before I go and expend energy doing frivolous things. Like standing around in a theme park all day, exhausting myself to ride roller coasters I know inside and out and backwards because I've been going here since the very first day I arrived on this effing continent. In this country, right? Because I shit you not. And I didn't plan this. I didn't choose this. It wasn't my will. It wasn't my idea. It just happened this way because my parents thought, hey, we can do this. Let's do this. And also, it was a different time. Things cost a lot less all the way around. But we literally landed in Southern California got off the plane, booked into a hotel, and spent the night getting ready in anticipation of going to Disneyland. Sometimes I tell it like we got off the plane and went straight to Disneyland, which is stand-up comedy hyperbole. That's technically probably not true. We probably went on our third day or whatever. Within the first day or 4, we went to Disneyland, right? It was like, I didn't see anything else. I didn't know what Disneyland was, really. I didn't grow up with a big Disney-loving culture. Some kids are brought up on Disney so in depth that they don't know a day. Star Wars was that for me, but Disney didn't know them back then. They got nothing to do with nothing at that point. It was all, and there wasn't even a Lucasfilm, if I remember correctly. It was George Lucas under whatever studio banner originally produced these things. If I don't remember which, I could have, should have, would have Googled that to confirm and sound a little bit more intelligent on my own show. But also, you get me. I'm relaxed and groovy. I'm hyper intelligent and relaxed and groovy about it. That's not my FOMO moment. I'm just saying, like, I'm a lifelong Disney love-hate enthusiast fan. Like, there's things I love about it. There's plenty of things I could go off on tangent about critiquing about it. And since they don't pay me, and also I'm not going to reveal any of the things that I know from behind the scenes stuff. Like, I know how to appropriately abide by the basic fundamentals of like business ethics and like not dish out, industry trade when you've worked and signed a legally binding, which no longer applies because it's been decades since I worked there. But at the time when I worked there, everybody who works there signs a legally binding non-disclosure agreement to not sell out the mouse and any of the trade secrets involved in the park. I can tell you all kinds of fun anecdotes about my time at the park. But that's not what this episode's about. This episode's about Star Wars, Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi, and where was I going with the statement about the thing and Star Wars and working there, and I really derailed myself hard that time. I started thinking about this one time when I was told by an old timer all about the cats that live on Tom Sawyer's Island. And then watched them walk away from Tom Sawyer's Island. That's the kind of story that I would love to tell in a stand-up comedy show. But I don't know that without getting pre-approval that I could get away with, right? Like, I don't think that I technically would get, I think once somebody from legal at Disney heard about it, somehow, social media or whatnot, that I'd be getting a cease and desist order letter kind of thing. Or worse, which I don't want. Do not need the mouse's lawyers on my ass. And I appreciate a lot of what they've got, and for fuck's sake, they own Marvel, right? So I'm a Marvel fan. That was one of the directions I wanted to get back into. World building. We're talking about world building in there. There was something I wanted to state a little bit more clearly that I thought I misstated or didn't quite express very well. But now I've lost that tangent. But to button this interjection up and just go straight into something topical and then back to the tape. I'm not usually into, which one's who beats who, which one's the betterest, item versus item, individual versus individual kind of nonsense competitions. I'm constantly speaking out against people who really have to trash talk the video game that they don't like in the genre of the video games that I play all of them, right? That's sort of a wild, seemingly irrelevant personal anecdote. But in social media circles and in the groups, there's a new game that's just come out in a particular genre of games that's heralded as a big disruptor. And people from one of the older, more mainstay, more super popular game franchises, and this is all on mobile, mind you, not even PC, not platform stuff, but phones and tablets. But these games are pretty awesome and pretty intense, and because they're competitive esports style games, people take them kind of seriously. There's no storytelling, there's no narrative, there's no missions. I mean, there's missions and there's a little bit of that reverse engineered inside and out backwards, so that no matter what you're doing, all you're really doing is getting into the matchmaking algorithm, getting set up with teams, and dropping into some sort of arena match, right? And trying to climb the leaderboards, because it's all about leaderboards. It's not, the rest of it, the world building and whatnot, beyond thin, thinner than Star Wars thin. But boom. Thank you, folks. I'll be here all night. But so this rivalry instantly happens where devotees of a certain video game title, and I don't want to get into it too much because I want to save this for an episode I'm going to do soon that's might be sort of media review-ish, but it's also going to be like my gaming corner sort of episode. But it became title versus title, and I've been running around going, I play them both. Actually, I play like 24 of them. And I'm not trying to climb the leaderboards in all of them, but I like to jump into a match on some of the obscure rando ones that I haven't played in a long time, as you may witness on my gaming stream, where, basically I'm playing video games as a way to panhandle for money legitimately on the internet. Please help me before I start starving. No, I'm kidding. That's a joke, but also it's not a joke. Okay, so the podcast, it's a true work of passion, this podcast, the Almost Daily ZenCast. And this special segment, sub-series, that's part of me reimagining and redeploying my attempt to include on a regular schedule a sort of movie critic corner style special segment feature of the show. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful for all of you hanging in there and dealing with the interjections and the spiraling out of control nature and the disorganized chaos that is my mind trying to share with you my thoughts about this thing. So hopefully I made whatever point I stopped myself to interject about. And I'm now totally staring at a blank screen in my head saying, just like, if there were a stage manager off to one side, they'd be making hand gestures indicating that I need to wind it down and cut myself off and just push play. I would have introduced the hunting of the Jedis in the previous, what I called the previously on pre-opening titles kicker or pricker. Ooh, that one just came out impromptu. I didn't think it through. Sorry, the pricker. No, stop. Because the kicker, I love the kicker. That's not always not no longer. It is no longer the primary term for the end credit, mid credit, post credit gift scenes, the bumper scenes, the extra little glimpses into something, which quite beautifully, in my humble opinion, they didn't invent this. Some people will very short-sightedly believe that Marvel Cinematic Universe invented this practice. It is not the case. They were not the first to ever put a post-credits kicker. And there was, if I remember correctly, in television terms, who did it a lot, to the point where it was clearly a part of the dynamics of the show. The Venture Brothers. The Venture Brothers show on Cartoon Network, years before the Marvel Cinematic Universe became what it has become, was doing that, right? And plenty of examples before. Because opening sequences, overtures, title sequences, title cards, and end credits, opening credits, those kinds of things are tropes that are, kind of their own unique form. They are their own staple template forms within the overall broad cinematic, tool set. They evolve, and people who really come at filmmaking with an experimental mindset will tinker and explore and reinvent them and turn them inside out and whatnot. So, I digress. We coulda, shoulda, woulda for episode 1 had a more cinematic, Star Wars cinematic, all inclusive scope of the previously on moment, right? Separate from the thing that I think was perfect in and of itself as the Obi-Wan specific, the Ewan McGregor Obi-Wan centric recap. We could have had a broader, more sweeping, thematic recap, right? Reminding us of and giving us a little bit more context about where the score stands between the Empire and the Jedi and everything else, etc. at the beginning of this episode. And which, like I said, it could have been its own interesting opening scene or sequence with its own mini plot line and crescendo and denouement that then afterwards sort of glides us in some sort of Star Warsy way into the homage, tip of the hat, opening credits rolling sequence with some kind of innovation on it, some sort of new twist to how it goes or how it works. And then we could have cut to, real quickly, the establishing shot of Tatooine and then a nightlife shot of the pub with a tip of the hat reference to the Star Wars music, because who doesn't love the freaking cantina Star Wars music? And then a twist on it that was fresh and new, and then the introduction of this Grand Inquisitor, who should have not looked remotely at all like Darth Vader. And his diversity hire sidekicks, no offense, but that's what that really looked like. I mean, the main guy was whiter than white as white could be, and looks like a fascist, is being a fascist, literally, in the execution of his job, and his sidekicks are two, ethnically diverse minority peoples, but one of them also has bleached white, yet creepily jaundiced. It's not quite as white as the main white guy's skin. Come on, Star Wars. Really? Like, that's slapdash, the way there doesn't seem to be any cohesiveness to the different species of critter people in the worlds. There's just, the most well-defined non-humanoid humanoids, the most defined ones are the Wookiees, and we know next to nothing about them. Instead, we have Ewoks, we get a whole cultural freaking anthropological view into their society in one film, and then they apparently cease to exist. We don't even get an explanation if they were genocided or butchered to death, right? And the rest of the diversity that we see is like some sort of Mod Podge competition with leftover Halloween clippings and trimmings of pieces of stuff, and here's part of a monster bat and a little bit of Frankenstein and then a little bit of cyborg and what? It's come on, Star Wars. And I'm going way back to the OG, because the OG was like this. That was part of the charm of the story. The universe around them was nebulous and thin, and although you were supposed to be thinking in terms of really broad and intergalactic space travel, because this is all happening in a galaxy far, far away, they never leave the freaking galaxy. Okay, I had to pause and interject there. That's one of the funniest things to me about all of Star Wars. Except that I think maybe in one of the movies they do. Because there's one movie of the newer kinds where somebody goes on a side quest that takes up the entire crazy thing to do a thing that takes 10 seconds. And then improbabilistically hauls ass back just in the nick of time to get back in time, to race, beat someone else racing that never left the local space neighborhood. It's what? But I think, rule of thumb, we don't leave the galaxy very far, right? It's all about this galaxy that they're in. And there's talk about, somewhere in this episode, here of Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi, there's talk about the colonies at the fringe. And I know that there's a video game on Oculus that I'm dying to play. And I've just been avoiding the Oculus all this time because for reasons. And I need to stop avoiding it and incorporating it into the cycle because it just needs to get going. So reeling it back, it's hilarious to me that that's the case. And also, this thing that I'm critiquing, I wanted to make this very, very clear. This thing I just went, Star Wars, come on, about, it's one of the things that I kind of loved about it, the first three films. And then I'm like, I just don't know how I feel about the way they've carried on with the idea since. Like, it's like, to me, they just keep missing the mark where I can conceive of really rich potential of beautifully integrating the old school tropes and costumes and technology used in the original films and now, since it's supposed to be, I mean, literally right now in this show, right? This is a prequel to episodes 4, 5, and 6, which I guess lives somewhere in the awkward, very vaguely underdefined time gap between episode 3 and episode 4, right? And it's weird and awkward because I thought they were going to keep Anakin really, really, really young for a really long time in that new trilogy, and instead they made him a full-grown adult and slammed him into the Darth Vader suit faster than I expected. And then, boom, they don't really tell you how much more time has passed, except that suddenly his baby son, his baby twins that he never knew, are full-grown adults. Well, coming-of-age adults. I don't know. Maybe the timeline makes more sense than I originally wanted to think that it did. Once I settled in with the rewatching of all of the films in the chronological order that it's supposed to go in. And there's something about my own, feeling of it all being jarring and discombobulated has probably more to do with the weird order in which they all came out over time, which was what it was, right? Like, it just is what it is and you can't do much about it. I digress, and I reel it all back in. I love some of these things that I'm poking fun at, and I just wanted to be clear. And I truly, genuinely, am I bemoaning too much? I really don't want people to tell me that I hate trolled Star Wars. I didn't. I called out my honest questions that as a fan, as a lover of the franchise, these are the flaws that I see. And final footnote, should somehow any industry professional happen to come across this podcast and listen to this, when I say I would have done it differently, trust me, I'm not blindly imagining narcissistic things that I would do for my own sake. I'm really trying to imagine, with the way my creative mind was developed and the skills that I had either innately or were given to me by my education or sharpened, to be a keen collaborator that takes what the product is as I'm presented it and collaboratively develops some new dimension to it, some new emphasis to it, some new material for it, some new way to understand it and see it and express it, so that it can be even more powerfully the vision, as I understand it, is expressed to me by the other collaborators, that it is meant to be. For when I see gaps between the vision, or the vision as I might imagine it, which, if I'm being invited to be a collaborator, is totally valid. When I'm being an armchair critic, amateur pretendo critic for my own literature reasons, still remains really valid, but also is much easier to make fun of and ridicule and sweep aside. But I digress. That's all. I just wanted to make sure it was known that I love the shit that I'm poking fun at here. And I love Jim Henson, just in case anybody freakishly and mistakenly has come to the wrong conclusion that I don't. And Frank Oz I guess sort of the bigger part of the context is, for me, from the beginning, from I Love Lucy, I shit you not, my first week here in the States involved watching a lot of I Love Lucy because it was the only thing she would let me watch. The TV was off. The parents watched the news after the kids went to sleep to keep informed, and read it in the papers and da-da-da-da. We didn't have mobile devices. We didn't have screens everywhere. We had a TV. And my mother was in charge of it. My dad didn't have any interest in it, really. And my mother was in charge of what we were and were not allowed to watch. And she put in the effort. And she picked I Love Lucy to kind of bring it all back around again. So, formative, right? And believe it or not, for a 50s black and white TV show, there was production value and special effects and camera tricks and, things that you could discern with a keen eye as a viewer from the show as it was captured and preserved historically on film. And Star Wars, likely, the same, although not owned by Disney, and this is why I bring it up, at the time, not represented in the park in any way, shape, or form the way it is now. To finish the thing I totally lost track on, the one thing in the world that I really had FOMO about ever was this past before the pandemic, 2019 or whatever, Christmas 2019, when everyone in my entire step family and my family went to Disneyland and experienced Star Wars Land, whatever they call it. Galaxy's Edge, I guess that's what they call it. And I'm, ding, 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 ding. Something I said earlier that I trailed off on and got totally distracted about. One of the most weirdest, awkward, most uncomfortable pieces of social media footage I've ever seen from the park. And mind you, I've now given the full disclosure that I've worked there before on 2 different occasions. Like, summer long's worth of work as a kid. I drove Main Street Electrical Parade way back in the day. The year before or the year after my senior year, I think. And then sometime after college, I worked as a janitor. Glorious AF it was not. And I cleaned toilets and swept cobblestones and the full spectrum of things that a janitor does in Disneyland overnight on the park, which I probably shouldn't be talking about too much detail. I did it. And I did it lovingly and willingly because one of my other fondest, earliest memories in all of being, the history of being here in America, is that on the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th day, sometime in the first week, as I was acclimating to I Love Lucy and going, oh wow, American television is so different than television back home, we went to Disneyland, right? And I was at some point this episode or the previous one, I was talking about the proximity to arriving here in the United States as a beginning to observe, being a keen observational thing. And one of the Disney magic things that I immediately fell in love with and wanted more of in the world and thought was going to be everywhere in the future was the robots. Which I realize now, and obviously you may be gathering, may be realizing I toy with. They weren't robots, because robots are very specifically defined. And what's in the park, what's in any amusement park, is not a robot. Kids will obviously call it a robot once they realize that it's a machine and not a person in a costume. When it is. Obviously, there's people in costumes too, but that's a different thing. The alarmingly weird, creepy image that I saw that I keep trailing off on the second thing before I go off on the robots thing is a stormtrooper, curiously, robot that's a person in a costume, not an actual robot. Or are they robots? Are they clones? Was really confused by all of that clone business from forever ago and have yet to watch the right shows in the Star Wars universe to clarify. But on social media, there's a lot of things trying to get out all at the same time because they're all interconnected and all about Star Wars and Disneyland and the new nexus that it is becoming. And my relationship to the 2 properties separately. And as seminal formative pieces of media, the deeply informed my creative mind. in today, contemporary, postmodern media, relating to the FOMO bit, I didn't ever go to Star Wars Land. I've never seen and I didn't realize it at the time, right? So I didn't know what I was missing out on. And then they came back and they were like, oh yeah, we went to Galaxy's Edge. And I'm like, what the fuck is Galaxy's Edge? Did they open a new restaurant? And there's been some Star Wars integration into Tomorrowland before. I've had friends who perform in the Tomorrowland Terrace Space Theater show in that band that's Star Wars themed, which is really cool. I've cleaned that room underneath the elevator once as a janitor years before. So hopefully none of this gets me sued or gets my show shut down. I no longer work there. I should no longer be beholden to anything. And I'm not revealing any industrial secrets. Okay, so too many things at once from too many different moments in my personal life happening because the nexus of Star Wars and Disneyland. I'm vividly flashing back to the day they took out what was, in the entire time of me having a relationship with Disneyland as a theme park, up until that day, my favoriteest ride ever, the Journey to Inner Space. They tore that shit out and replaced it with what at the time I was ready to reject, and then I begrudgingly sort of fell in love with over the years, the much now beloved Star Tours, which honestly, right this hot second, I don't know if it's still there or not. If I walked into Disneyland, I would not be surprised if that got torn out and replaced by something, and then Galaxy's Edge, which I don't even know where it is. Is Galaxy's Edge in Tomorrowland and like taking over a patch of Tomorrowland that they co-opted and rebuilt and re-engineered? Or is it somewhere else out beyond the western frontier and stuff, and where I know they've got slightly more room to expand and build stuff because I know the layout of the park and the things that they don't use and things that are backstage but were technically once part of the front stage and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I don't know the answer to the things that I don't know, but I do know that the moment I realized that my family went to Star Wars Land, which is what I will always lovingly call it in my mind, whatever it's actually called on the Disneyland map, whenever I get around to go visit it, because I theorize that I probably will. Is it in California Land? Is it in the California Adventure Park and not in the original Disney park? That would be sad. I've covered for someone over in California Adventure once during my during my maintenance years, when I work on maintenance crew, but I never drove. I mean, it didn't exist when I drove the Main Street Electrical Parade, and the Main Street Electrical Parade was the OG. I mean, it was on Main Street. And it was not in the middle of the day. It was at night, and it was glorious. And all y'all who never saw it that way missed out. I mean, if you're into Disney and into the park, that was peak awesomeness of Disney stuff. And simple makes for like in the moment wow and nostalgia value. I mean, it was freaking Christmas tree lights on chicken wire. Legit. But it was like there was Pete the Magic Dragon blowing smoke in your face and sparkling, right? Anyways, and that song with the robot announcer. Okay, the open-ended gap that I haven't talked about. So FOMO'd, my parents, my dad and the stepmom and everybody affiliated on both sides went. I did not. I stayed home feeling mildly miserable, but not so sick that I couldn't have gone, and was grumbled about it. And as an old school hardcore Disney attendee, fan, I wouldn't say, but do I enjoy going to the park and enjoying my own journey of being there? Yes. Especially given the weirdo, wacky, fun things that I know because I used to work there? Absolutely. Do I have blind faith to the corporation? Hell no. That's another episode. Do I love most of their movies? Yes. Do I think some of their content is questionably kind of malarkey? Yeah, sure. Am I out to do a hit job on them? Absolutely not. Do I respect them as a flawed and imperfectly perfect human institution that may have things that we can criticize and have things that can be better about, and that also has the right to be making content, making money on it? Absolutely, my friends. Welcome to the show. This is how I think. The one alarming thing that I saw that kind of just shocked me that I found it alarming and that I need to process, and that I would need to see and experience firsthand in the park, was that not from my family, but recently, very recently, in fact, leading up to getting to do this week, leading up to this moment of doing this podcast, I saw some reel, some TikTok, some loop, some video loop. And I don't remember exactly what the wait for it moment was, because I was just like, ooh, weird, awkward, so strange. About the other thing going on in it. But it's a family, it's somebody videotaping in whatever they call Star Wars land. And there's characters walking around doing the character work that they do, and there's stormtroopers. Now, obviously, I'm not so idiotic or naive that I don't understand that it's Star Wars characters walking around doing Star Wars things, right? But what wigged me out, and I wasn't surprised at all to see stormtroopers. What wigged me out that the stormtroopers, both of them, were carrying redonkulously, uncharacteristically, almost real-looking. I don't remember them being in Star Wars, the original movies, looking like that, long arms, in a sort of, I know how to shoot a gun kind of way, as opposed to absent-mindedly holstered and sort of never being used, or sort of being used in a clearly like, this is a fake toy gun and I don't know how to shoot real guns because I'm just an actor in a costume being a robot kind of way. It was like, ugh. And again, friends, for those of you who hadn't heard me say it, and for those of you who have and need to hear me say it again, I'm not anti-gun. I don't hate guns. I don't irrationally want to steal everyone's guns away. I don't think the government should have that right. I think that moderate regulations that make sense, that are actually safety-based, that are age-based, that are skills-based, that are training-based, are pursuable, and it should be done. And that, yes, we must figure out the right physical form, body, shape, style, boundary line where it's like, yup, and more hardcore than that, it's for the military, folks. And the military industrial complex, subsidiary side hustle industries shouldn't be hyper-profiteering on selling it through fear-mongering at normal people who don't need military-grade weapons. You want to defend your house? Your fundamental security and hunting and sporting guns will do the trick. You do not need a 60, 80, 90, 120 mag round fucking super killing machine of murderous intent. Because that's what those are. But I digress. That's not what the Star Wars stormtroopers were carrying. They were carrying something, some kind of prop, I presume, right? But it was just weird. Theme parks are precisely the kind of places that, A, you do not want bad guys with guns showing up in, brandishing their guns and, causing chaos. B, you would hope has security protocol and measures that are reasonable and not too tyrannical, but balanced and effective to prevent that sort of thing and to respond to that sort of thing, like stationed but not like mounted and strapped patrol officers, but like stationed local police officers that can initial response and coordinate with, the local police that are further afield. Like a substation, whatever they call it, that's on the premises, plus, the fast responder backups of the local departments. But what you don't want is people walking around strapped like they do in real red gun-licking states, at the grocery store, in a theme park full of strangers, full of children, full of foreigners, full of people with money, full of people with barely enough money to have gotten into the park, full of innocent bystanders just trying to ride cool roller coaster rides. Which brings me back to my other point. Let me segue. I didn't think those guns were real. It just wigged me out how realistic they looked. And it made me feel uncomfortable. Because never have I ever, in my memory, especially from having worked there, in the primary park, in Disneyland main campus, ever seen any characters that carry big giant weapons around, that blatantly. That kind of sort of almost looked like, clearly they look like the stormtroopers, but, they just had this vibe to them, the silhouette. I didn't like the cut of their jib, but also, I get it. I'm not against it. I'm not trying to be a Karen. I wouldn't have called the manager or anything. Just that moment of seeing it on video and seeing these two stormtroopers. They weren't just walking by. They weren't on stage. They weren't like robots in a ride where that would make perfect sense. And the guns always look super fake, right? Like they were two very real looking people in armored suits, which, I don't know if they went so far as to make the obviously plastic stormtrooper suits look a little bit more like some kind of ballistic defense space metal suits for the park or not. But I can imagine they could have. And in the video, it was a 30-second freaking loop clip that I saw. These two dudes were walking like trained professionals that know what they're doing. And they turned and pointed the shit at little kids. Now, little kids know they're at Disneyland. When I first got here, as a little kid, as I explored the space and rode the rides, I understood that this was an entertainment venue of a performative kind, and that that wizard over there wasn't a real wizard. But also, there are kids who believe in Santa Claus until really quite desperately late in life, etc. And there are plenty of kids that would not immediately understand that they were perfectly safe because this giant robot with the scary metallic voice pointing what can only be interpreted as an aggressive boomstick of some kind is pointing it at your face. And knowing the park, it's counterintuitive to me. I would have guessed that there would have been rules and regulations and policies explicitly against waving any prop guns in little kids' faces up close while walking along. Not from the stage. I'm talking these dudes and these families were walking side by side, cross traffic in, the regular walking sidewalk spaces of whatever, galaxy, space, edge land, Star Wars land layout that they were walking on. But I digress. All of this ties back in together to this thing that I love from the very earliest memories of my youth, and that's special effects. And which has a lot to do with some of the things that I'm going to complain about in the last big... Oh my God, it's 107 minutes and 38 seconds. I cannot believe I've rambled this long, but if I cut things off now, I won't be able to find this particular point I've paused in later, so I'm not gonna. We're just gonna power through. The French fourth is if maybe I stop and edit this post-live production and download the file, cut it, and re-upload the shorter version with the fourth part following. I might do that. And if I do that, I would do it right here. But since we're still live and we're still going, I'm just going to keep powering through. Hi. If I did edit it, welcome back. If I didn't edit it, let's just jump back in. So there's just a lot of weird, interesting, sort of jumbo shrimp oxymoronic things about the way the world building evolved around Star Wars, in my humble opinion. It's not an example of thorough, deep, in-depth, well thought out world building. But it works. It functionally works because it's cute, except for when you get the Jar Jar Binks. Although, to Jar Jar Binks' credit, there's a whole generation of people who love him, who thinks he's adorable, and thinks he's way more hilarious than R2-D2, who is that stiff, can't bend his elbows, British prick in a tin can.
right? So
I totally meant C-3PO
what
when I said R2-D2 there.
All I know
R2-D2
is
is
that
beloved
I had
and
big
beyond
hopes for
reproach
Obi-Wan, as I'm
because he
sure
speaks in a language that
statement
transcends
applies
English
to the entirety
and cultural
of the Star Wars
attitudes.
fan community.
He speaks in robot bleeps
and
and
so
bloops
far,
and is the cutest tin can ever.
you know, I'm liking
But
other shows.
my
a lot
critique
better.
there
I'm
was
not- I'm
C-3PO,
not
who I
feeling
went through an
the
animosity
pulse, the
phase
grip, the
with.
excitement.
There was a time when I loved him and
this
adored
whole
him, and I
I'm
thought
not
he
the
should have been the
man you're
superhero of the entire thing
about
because he
him
was the comic
that Ewan
relief.
McGregor is playing,
And the fancy British guy.
and
'Cause I
the
love fancy
giant
British
fish
comic relief
sushi.
guys.
Oh,
And
another
women. Men and
critique,
women, whatever they are.
criticism.
I love
What the
fancy
F
British
question
comic
mark
relief.
about the
Hoity-toity,
giant
but
sand
humbled
sushi fish factory?
Upper middle
The
class.
whole
that
everything
gets,
is open
that
air.
gets a little
in
bit
the
of
middle of a
humble pie
dune field.
because they're not quite like
So
upper crust, so that they can avoid
This is like
the pile
some sort of
entirely.
sand sushi.
That kind of stuff.
There is no
Love
rice.
it.
There is just
Why?
the grains
I
of
don't know.
sand.
Maybe because right next to
you know,
or
ethnic,
right alongside
colloquial, freaking cuisine.
I Love Lucy.
That only connoisseurs go after.
I watched a lot of
who made
insert
who
name
approved
of
those
what's his
choices?
name here,
If
from
they-
which that
if they're gonna
classic
be-
bit of comedy
If
trope
it's going to be
music
desert
that
space
sounds
fish
like
sushi,
it's as ancient as Bringing the Clown, not Bringing the Clowns.
it coulda, shoulda, woulda,
but that
all
circus
made
song
more
that's actually
actual
classical music,
sense.
but that's not yet.
But I guess, you know, that's one of the things with Star Wars
But
is
the
like-
other one, the Benny Hill Show,
like from
has
day
its
one,
own-
some
everyone
of the
recognizes
robots
the music
just looked like
and knows
garbage
it and
cans
knows
spray painted
it's
metallic
got
colors.
something to do
You know, like
with
little
pretty
people
girls
inside
running
them.
around,
And
potentially braless.
it's always been that,
and or topless.
We
which are two
love
different
that.
states
I
of
love that.
This
But,
road movement.
like,
To be clinical.
Can we not
And,
overindulge
chased
in
by
that
an awkward-looking,
darling
creepy, pervy
flaw
British
to
guy
new heights of absurdity
from the 70s.
and maybe
Ooh,
start
it's all
to
fun
sort
and
of
games and this isn't
marginally
sexual harassment.
edge our
And
way
it's perfectly
towards
fine to put
a
this
more
on TV.
unified
Thank you, British
consistency.
television.
Like, stick to it with the
era
weirdness
of
we've already
British
got.
TV. The Benny Hill Show.
And
I'm not
keep
trying to
it
defend any
consistent.
of that part of
Right.
it at all. But
Like one of the things that I'm not a fan
I mean,
of in the
for those of you who don't know
weird,
Benny Hill,
incompatible
you must be familiar with
differentiation
hopefully,
between
one would
the
hope
original
that if
movies
you don't know Benny Hill,
and
you do
and
know
some of the newer movies.
Monty Python.
Is how like droids
and even
androids,
they indulged
robots
in the occasional
because of the limitations of the technology.
Oh,
at the
look,
time,
there's
the
women and they
costumery
have
practices
boobs.
of
Sight
that
gag
generation.
because
the robots
one way to
look like
fight
people in
sexism is
pieces
to
of
be like,
plastic.
what?
That's what it is.
They're human
Even the
beings.
R2D2
And they
is
have boobs.
clearly
Can we
most
just
of the time
talk about the
when
things
it's
we're
not a
gonna
little
talk
remote
about
control
instead of,
really fixating on that
gadget
is
and
someone
being
in
funny
there,
in
right?
ways about being funny instead of, and
C-3PO
conversely
is
you
a
know they're
person
trying to do this
wearing
because they would
tin
also
suit.
play female characters in drag.
The
So, I don't
garbage
know.
can robot that
Maybe
I'm
I'm
thinking of is that we see just mindlessly walking around inside the giant rust butt that is
I hopefully
where we
said
find
thing-
R2D2
again,
when
I
they get
really get to this
taken
point
up by
in
the
interjections
sand
and I go,
pirates.
did I
What are those
actually
little
nail the thing I wanted
trolly
to
people
nail?
with the light
Or did I get
eyeballs called?
sidetracked
I
somewhere
forget.
along the way? Because right now I'm staring at a blank screen,
but,
and I hear DJ Zed,
so
grinding quietly away.
That's all fine and good. If you're going to make new movies,
Instead of, like,
and it's not going to
stop and try
be
to
an
figure it out.
effing reboot,
So diving back in,
which is
hopefully
the best of
without
my understanding, none of this is.
very many more interruptions.
right? Like, let's be clear about
part
our media
two
terminology
of part
Lucasfilms and the Star Wars
of
property
the incorrigible
has
Mr.
never
Zeppo's
once been
media review
rebooted.
of Obi-Wan
This
Ben
is all
Kenobi on Disney
prequel, postquel, through line in the same storytelling. Oh my god, I totally just did that thing again where I failed to pause it and then I started talking through it and I'm really sorry. I kind of sort of hate myself right now. I can't believe I did that. I thought I'd paused that correctly and I clearly hadn't. And I suck for that. And for whatever we now, all of that was probably unintelligible. I really dread hearing that now. Both the two instances of it. I'm so sad. I'm so upset with myself. This is going to like bum me out. But also, hopefully it's kind of funny. At least the fact that I caught it and fixed it. Tried to fix it, but I can't rewind. I wish I could back up however long I've been talking for and replay whatever I just talked over. But I can't. I apologize. Dear Sprecher.com, feature request. Please and thank you. I will now shut up and let the tape speak for itself. Universe and the consistency between eras is now in the post era of it, the hindsight 2020 era, some of the creators are mixing and matching. We've got some of the old school costumes cropping up in different colors, or costumes very similar to the old school costumes cropping up that are clearly homages and rehashings of those styles next to more CGI robots. I kind of don't like it, but when it's most egregious is that four-armed robot with the 3 different lightsabers or whatever he was. They're like, he was a Sith? Robots can be Sith Lords? Because these aren't like super intelligent, super advanced AI robots. They never were. They were like mundane, mechanical working people, working replacement machines, right? To replace people. They weren't even, well, I mean, R2D2 was not. He got lowered to that position, but he was actually in government and a translator and a cultural attaché. But I digress. Supernatural, psychic, midi-chlorian-driven superpowers in a skeleton. I mean, was he originally a person and then he got cyberized? Is that what happened? Is he sort of like a Ghost in the Shell kind of thing? In which case, then I guess it makes sense if he still has chakras, because despite the midi-chlorians, it's really quite obvious and clear that the Force is the Tao, the way, and the energy that ancient mysticism talks about, taken to science fiction, magical, swords and spells level of exaggeration. So things like that have always sort of just trapped my hide, rubbed me the wrong way. It's like, what are you going to do? But it's one of the quirks of Star Wars that there's never been, although there obviously the George Lucas vision is the overarching blueprint, it is itself, George Lucas's own final product has always been a little wonky, a little wobbly, a little like Jim Henson cut corners, and a little willing to just be like slap, dash, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more, it doesn't matter, because bang, bang, cute girls and laser beams, and wah, 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 isn't it fun? They almost kissed, but they're brother and sister. And then deep wisdom about spiritual things that don't actually say anything deep or wise. That's it. That's the brand, right? Am I wrong? Have I mischaracterized Star Wars? It's basically like, don't be a Nazi, try to be spiritual, and we never really fleshed it out so deep that it becomes something as, engrossing as Dune can be, right? Or, no offense, like when it comes to epic space opera sagas, Dune has the backbone in the original material. What do you call that? The source material, right? Whereas Star Wars was a brilliant cinema, it lacked the foundation of a clearly well-established literary, imaginary universe of that kind, which almost always, gets fleshed out much more in depth. And so the charm can work. I've never wanted to completely side with those who say that Star Wars, Jim Henson, there's puppets pretending to be real things and real things pretending to be puppets. Like, it works in a way, but you gotta get it just right, and you gotta focus on the sweeping up of the characters in the story dilemma that they face. And here's what will end my critique session on that. Dramatically speaking, this opening part 1 episode, which is a 45-minute episode with a 6.5-minute teaser trailer prequel thing in front of it, it's lackluster in its building of tension. It relies a little too much on the Empire's bad, the Jedis are good, what's wrong with Obi-Wan? He's pretending not to be a Jedi. And the moment that works, where I finally felt like here's some storytelling with good acting and that gives me narrative skin in the game. And that was not Anakin's dad, but Anakin's cousin, uncle, that is raising Luke. And when he meets with Obi-Wan, and what is that weird little concrete parking spot? Is that Obi-Wan's private, what are they called? Stablery? Like there's room enough, if these were horses, whatever that weird anteater that eats sand dune shark meat, like that doesn't make any sense when he feeds it that. 0 sense, dude. That's an anteater based body morphology, clearly. And of course it's fantasy, they can eat what they want. But if we're gonna go with like science fiction that at least looks and feels a little believable, if you're gonna give a creature an anteater face, it's only gonna do anteater things, which is, what do anteaters do? They sure as hell don't eat sushi. And I don't think that you could feed an anteater sushi. It eats insects, right? And its diet is sort of evolved and adheres to that. Anyways, that's the thing. The science in the Star Wars sci-fi is, in all honesty, in all brutal honesty, some of the thinnest amongst sci-fi greats. And that's okay. But what I'm saying is, if you're going to play with that motley crew, rough and tumble, Muppeteering kind of vibe, don't muck it up. Like, do it just right and don't go overboard and do it all wrong with too much CGI that we do not need, etc., etc. I wanted to back up and clarify that scene where Uncle Ben, it is Uncle Ben, isn't it? Why is it always Uncle Ben? And when does Uncle Ben have to die? Oh, wait, we already know the answer to that question. When Uncle Ben, like, sets Obi-Wan Kenobi straight and then has his life threatened by the Grand Inquisitor's sidekick, that's the movie where I felt like, that's the movie. That's the scene, the sequence, the moment, the theatrical moment, the cinematic moment. That's the storytelling moment when I was like, okay, now we're past all the awkwards, normalcy, the normal pleasantries of trying to set up the setting, as weird and awkward as that was, and as much as I found the context that they try to put Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi into as a character for the opening reveal of him being himself, at an arm's distance from the golden child that he must protect and eventually train. So yeah, there's a lot going on, and I jump in, I kind of dig into it a little bit. There's things that did work though, and that's one of them. That's the Uncle Ben as a character and by that actor and their performance stands out as sort of relative to what else is going on as something clear, like it makes sense. Whereas everything else has been a sort of little bit like, does that really make sense? So far, like every scene, there's been like a, wait, what exactly? How does this, what exactly? And then, okay, boom, now we get it. All right, diving back into the recording. And if you're gonna, if this whole show is as much about how Anakin finally becomes Darth Vader proper, even though he's apparently already been in the black suit, in the Vader suit since whenever 10 years ago and or more ago. I really don't know. Whatever's going on with Darth Vader, well, if they're going to focus on that, that should be clear, right? Easy to understand. It shouldn't be confusing. characters that muck it up, like the Grand Inquisitor, aren't helping. And it should make freaking sense in relationship to whatever else is going on that we know about Darth Vader. And if that is, okay, now, I don't know which way it's going to go. If the Grand Inquisitor is Darth Vader, being played by not Hans Christian Janderson, whatever that dude's name was, that played I'm a whiny noob pre-Vader Anakin, and he just hasn't fully completely become Darth Vader, what the F? Because when he's rescued by Sith Lord Palpatine, he gets put into the full suit. So why would he have over-recovered, needed less of the suit, and then get put back into the suit? What? I don't think he will be. I think Darth Vader's going to show up, and he's going to, like, boss the Grand Inquisitor around, and or maybe maglev him and break his neck. Maglev him, that's not what he does. Force choke him in the air. Who knows? I don't. But I hope that it isn't that it pulls out of this like slow barrel roll into a nosedive of like uninspiring. So far, they really didn't do Star Wars music justice, right? And I mean that sincerely, and I know that in the recording I don't talk as much about the music and whatnot as I could, although I do think I've made the point, if somewhat obtusely. Although it was there was music, it was sort of all in the sound and tone range of what we expect from a Star Wars property. And the many helmet logo is a cute thing that does also sort of echo in the right frequency, or however you want to describe it. There was a very pointed lack of the kind of John Williams level of epicness that does not go over the top into grandiosity, right? Like that's the beautiful charm about John Williams' original score, is that it was big, it was bold, it was beautiful. It was a full freaking orchestra and a half, and it managed to be nimble, emotionally communicative, and sort of just always so perfectly perfect for the moment, and almost, I'm not sure how to describe it, but almost seamless in its transition from introducing new movements and building into the crescendos of whatever this piece of music that you're working with is in the particular moment cinematically, and sort of dissolving away and leaving the audience back into the sort of like the natural audio environment of just being in the scene. That level of sophistication and complexity is what's missing, and what I'm calling out here in this stumblingly awkward statement about them not doing enough justice in honoring John Williams and that music and the score from the first three films. It's legacy level, like gold standard, right? Like in my humble opinion, any and all storytelling spin-off properties should manage to live up to that level of beautiful musical thematic, intelligent musical thematic expression, and try to incorporate the traditional fundamental ingredients of the original score in a respectful way without it getting heavy-handed and tired and trite. So I totally understand, making the effort to not over invoke it, not overtax it, not overuse the chords and the harmonies. But this felt, and maybe I'm remembering wrong, maybe it was there and it was subtle enough that I just didn't notice it, and the second viewing is necessary. It's entirely possible. But what was missing was all the features I've already outlined in the previous recordings. And what I would have loved to see
which would have been the net result of the various things I've been suggesting and others that I may have failed to get around to actually articulating. But it's that I just would have liked for it to really feel more like this really is the moment right before the movie that it fits in between, you know? There was a lot of confusion. For a hot minute or three, the way this opening episode was unfolding, I was like, is this going to be, you know, speculatively wondering about what I'm about to see before I'm really clear on what it is? Is this going to be Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi doing this lurking fishmonger routine as he's getting ready to recruit Anakin? Which doesn't make sense, right? Because we've already been introduced to that. So like, what? And I know that's a really dumb place to jump to the conclusion of, but I'm not saying that it was misleading. It's not. It was just sort of ambiguous and generic enough in its, I'm guessing, in its creative assumptions that the audience knows exactly where every beat is placing them. And I, as a longtime admirer of the franchise and of the original movies, felt lost by the show. And my rational theoretical mind was trying to come up with solutions to what might be going on in the show that, you know, weren't being informed by any of the content I was being shown. That opening scene with the Star Troopers coming in, like, it rooted me in the sort of, and this is very Disney, in the sort of the cinematic flavor of a Star Wars experience while remaining incredibly generic, right? Like, I don't know what war this is. I don't know, you know, and when they take you 10 years later, I'm like, but 10 years later, when? How? Like, so how close are we to episode 3 now? Now we by the end of the episode, we understand because we see the two siblings as children in their you know, witness protection program like lives, and we get that this is, you know, this is the childhood origin story prequel from the eyes of Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi of Luke and Leia. And I don't know, just for something that's meant to be the immediate preceding prequel content to the canonical, like, groundbreaking episode of episode 3, it's not living up to fitting in for me. It just isn't. There's a lot of things, not the least of which that Ewan McGregor sounds like Ewan McGregor, and bless it, what the hell is the old guy's name? I sometimes can remember it. The actor that plays Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi in the first 3 original films sounds like him. And they're both British or English or whichever is the right way to call them English talkers, but their dialect is not the same. People will say, you mean their accent? No, their dialect. They're both speaking British English, but they have regional dialects that vary from wherever they might be derived from. What's the difference between American English and British English? It's not an accent. An accent is when you learn a completely different new language that you do not understand intuitively, and you are left with the leftovers of the enunciation habits in your mouth from your previous language that are dramatically different from the enunciation requirements of the new language that you're learning. That's an accent. A dialect is a regional variance to a language that's otherwise understandably similar, whether it be American English or British English or other variants of English that have existed. Arguably, British English has many sub-variants of, you know, this is Liverpool English. This is, I mean, go watch freaking My Fair Lady, right? Those are all dialects of British English. And, you know, Southern dialect of American English. A New York dialect of American English is not an accent. Unless you're talking about a foreigner that moved to New York and now sounds like a stereotypical New Yorker, even though he's from some foreign country and spoke a completely different language. Right? Then it would be, he picked up the New York dialect and it's given him a caricature accent. But that's a whole different analysis breakdown of a different kind. So, you know, there's reasons. There's reasons why I've been hesitant
and sort of not super accepting. It's got its strong suits, and it's things that are that survive from falling into complete mediocrity, if I may be so blunt. But it's also, I am that disappointed uncle. As I invoked before, that analogy. There's just things that I'm sorry, guys. Like, I'm looking at the promo image that is the big splash page for the show on Disney Plus, and I'm looking at the episodes. So it's the season 1, part 1, and then part 2, and they each have like a end cap or a little thumbnail image, and there's a background, big giant sort of like desktops quality sort of promotional image of Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi in a costume that looks like someone that sort of did a cheap Target job at cosplaying Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi in a costume that passes but doesn't look quite right to the original. And it's that kind of has just been rubbing me the wrong way all the way around. But I digress. Let's finish up this recording and end this prolonged episode relatively soon here, diving back in to the recording now. This is Obi-Wan freaking Ben Kenobi. And there's no grand, beautiful John Williams approved light music. And all the other things I've already shared. There's probably more things I could poke holes at. Oh, the commute. What is with Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi's commute right now? So he lives far away from the heart of the city in the desert so he can be anonymous. Takes a anteater camel into the city, which, I mean, the way they showed it, it looked like it would take him a day and a half each way to get there. To then get on an Airbus to travel way the F out in what, tragically, and I know that this can be difficult to convey in cinema, especially when everything is CGI, the exact same direction from which he came from. You got to be able to show me that they're going in a different direction, right? If you show a big, wide horizon vista view of him commuting into the city to catch the bus, and then it leaves, and it's the exact same wide horizon view with from the same direction, then he's going he's taking the bus back home. What? The sand sushi fish factory is further away than the city than what his house is. Then why didn't he just take his anteater camel to the factory? Like, what was all of that? And why did it occupy so much screen time? Right? I mean, right? Like, I'm not wrong. I don't think I'm wrong about that. Never mind my comment about the 6-minute, doubling up, like the duplicitous, and I mean that it was used twice in 2 different places, not that it's a liar. But the duplicitous opening 6 minutes. Coulda, shoulda, woulda been completely different content, giving us a broader recap perspective, right? My fundamental critical. And then this, like, what? Why was all of that screen time of this silly, very not real looking open air? That would be dangerous. An open air, it doesn't look like it has any kind of shielding or plexiglass or nothing, right? It's got rags on the end. Airbus, floating bus, maglev bus, whatever it is. Star Wars never explains its anti-gravity vehicles in any way, shape, or form. And it doesn't explain how space vehicles can fly like jet planes in the atmosphere, which is one of those things that's like nothing, it doesn't work like that. Physics does not work like that. Unless you're dealing with some other kind of propulsion device beyond the kind of things you would imagine are evolved from the development of propulsion rockets. Okay, but they don't call it out. They don't tell me that they're using maglev, global maglev flying engines. If that would maybe make more sense. But I digress. I mean, we see booster rockets on the backs of them, right? We don't see booster rockets on the bottom. And all of the wings of any Star Wars spacecraft that has ever also flown in the freaking air, totally not aerodynamic in any way, shape, or form that would conceivably, remotely have worked. And therefore, they would have all just crash landed and spiraled out of control, right? Like and I love the shots from whichever movie it is, one of the original three, that were clearly shot in the Yucatan, right? The Yucatan looking like mountains, and actual Yucatan, maybe not Yucatan, but clearly Latin American, ancient Aboriginal, archaeological dig sites were used for like static, generic, in the can establishing shots. Some of my favorite moments of like, oh, that's sad and awkward. And then they tried to put special effects on top of them a little bit, and it was a little more sad and awkward. But they were great because they did the job, simple, straightforward. And they were from some place that I have a fondness for in my heart. The lost Aboriginal, the wild lost Aboriginal places of Latin America. Those spaceships could never have flown the way, especially the way the technology at the time allowed them to show them. And that's, but that was nothing new. Like, I was watching the OG original 1970s Battlestar Galactica back in the day. It was a competing rival to my admiration for Star Wars, the original trilogy. And there was a hot moment there, maybe one hot summer, when Battlestar Galactica was winning, because there was just a lot more of the episodes, and it was like it was there, and it was in syndication, and I could watch a lot of it, all afternoon, and it was like slowly becoming more. And I thought maybe at the end of this golden rainbow of syndication, there were new episodes waiting to be delivered to me somehow from my TV box. I did not know that streaming services had not yet been invented in any way, shape, or form yet. But I had that sort of idea that maybe that's possible with this technology. I just don't know. As a child, TVs are magical. And we didn't, do you understand how televisions work right now? Could you explain it to a child in a way that makes sense to them and they can go, oh, okay, and explain it back to someone else? Probably not, dear friends. Probably not, he said, with a totally made-up, bogus, weak-ass British dialect. But I digress. So there, some of the things, the two dudes just don't sound like the same dude to me. And they don't look like the same dude to me. And they don't look like they dress like the same dude to me. And they don't look like he ages the right amount in the right amount of time, the right way to me. Superficial things that could totally be glossed over. Because it's not like I was about to say Hugh Jackman, and I know that's not Hugh Jackman, and I've said his name 12 times already today. Ewan McGregor. There are movies and entertainment pieces that I love him and his weird, wonky, sometimes it's really strong, sometimes it's kind of waffly, whatever dialect that it is, from wherever it's supposed to be from. I'm suddenly having weird flashbacks to Ian McGregor saying different weird things with this weird, awkward, interesting Irish, British, I don't know what, and I'm not trying to be rude or disrespectful. I just don't have that information at my disposal right this hot second. But his native dialect, he is adorable. And when he acts it up and hams it up a little bit, he's iconoclastically like one of those things from over there, one of those actors from over there, one of these great British Isle actors that are awesome and feel like what was he in things back in the 70s that I feel like I've been watching him my entire life? Impossible. He was like 12 when he first was in the first thing that we saw him here in the States in. Not 12, but a very young adult. He just doesn't sound like the old guy. I'm going in circles now. I digress. Next sentence not found. I'm just going to go push play. Here we go. Jumping back in. pensive Ewan McGregor looking sexy and ruggedly like Ginger Silver Fox on a public transport open air bus is not Star Wars. Okay. Shots fired. I forgot I said this. Wow. I would have like been laughing and paused this if it was someone else's thing that I was watching about Star Wars. Secondly, I remember the thing that I trailed off on. An open air, no canopy, no fucking shielding Airbus like that would be dangerous AF. And everyone would have sand, not just in their hair, not just in their face, up their freaking nostrils and in their ears. Because ain't no one ever stuck their head out a van bus window while it's driving through miles and miles and miles of sand dune, have they? Did in the recordings, I don't remember right now, and I have no way of confirming or verifying, have we already talked about the box that he buried? Okay, just in case we haven't yet, and it's somewhere in the next few minutes that are left, I won't say anymore. But the bus, that transport, there's no way that everyone would have been sitting there as comfortably as the up close inside the seating cabin shots would have allowed to. If they were really traveling as fast as they were, magleving just feet above the sand dunes, kicking up a freaking shit sandstorm of every bit of sand dune sand around them. Okay? Because trust me, I know, I've literally driven long trek across sand dunes in a Volkswagen minibus, and stuck my head out the window while other people were driving, obviously, for prolonged periods of time, and experienced those conditions. I was blowing sandy, crusty snot out my nose for 3 effing days. So the failure is just not on brand. It's like no spacefaring peoples with smart enough technology to build this would tolerate it without some freaking protection thing. And don't tell me there was a force field and I just didn't notice. I mean, if that is really the case, then I feel like a complete ass. But I don't think it is. And I don't think it was, and I don't think it did. So it fails on multiple levels, that whole commute sequence. And like I said, we didn't need all that screen time to establish that he's been there. And it would have made way more sense to have seen him living like a monk, like a Buddhist monk, somewhere in the dunes, in a sort of tribal, migratory kind of way, or deep in the mountains in a rock cave, like he seems to be, but like further up and away from the sand where it won't also just kill you because those caves get flooded with sand all the time. Because if you're right up against the actual sand dunes, it's not going to be a huge protection because the sand's going to blow right up and in. And he doesn't seem to have a door of any kind in his little literal man cave house / hut. So just things like if I'd been there, not on set, but in production development, right? If I'd been there in the writer's room, which is a dream job. And bless your hearts, everybody in the writer's room. I'm not trying to, belittle anyone. I'm just saying, did we miss an opportunity to make even better Star Wars choices? Because giant space shark sushi in the sand was interesting and quirky and weird and wild and fresh and new and all those things, and would have made epically great sense in some other tangential, maybe Star Wars themed, Star Wars adjacent product, but this is Obi-Wan effing Ben Kenobi we're talking about. The living, dying grandfather heart of the entire franchise, right? Spoiler alert, he dies, which is of course a running joke. But I don't know. Maybe I'm for as much as I don't know about Star Wars and I'm not hardcore nerd enough for the hardcore nerds, there's a reverence about it, which I do espouse, which I do honor, and which I do take a little bit of weird pride in, that like, I just would have done things a little differently. in order to be more in alignment with the spirit of the, embracing the flaws at all. Like, another fun-loving, like, bizarro, hilarious example. Do you all remember the scene where, and I don't remember which movie this is in, it could literally be in either of the three, and people will laugh at me for saying that, because it's obviously not, but it really could in my mind, because I don't remember. But when Luke Skywalker talks to the evil wizard guy, Senator Palpatine, in his final transformed state as Sith Overlord, Sithy guy, whatever the fuck his name is, whatever Palpatine's Sith name was. And I'm not even gonna talk about the other weird, crazy, what the F were you guys thinking Sith Lords of, like, mutant weirdness that I don't want to talk about him. Them. Whoever they were. Whatever their weird names were, whatever rationale and reasons there might have been for them looking the way they did. We're not going to go there today. If something like that happens in this episode, in this show rather, then we will. But as of yet, it isn't the case. Although, of course, they're canon, so they'll exist. They must exist. But theoretically, because this show is set preeminently on the verge of the beginning of, within a lifetime span's worth, less than 20 years worth of time of episode 3, and everything I think that needs to be known about who is and is not in control of the Empire is established canon. They're not going to try to throw some surprise curveball secret supervillain boss guy that we never heard of before. And if they do, I will be even deeper in my disgruntled disappointment. But that doesn't mean I hate it. Please don't get me wrong. I kind of really enjoyed watching it. Maybe not as much as The Mandalorian. And also, what's the other one? Bloop, bleep, bloop, bloop. The one with the little green Yoda guy that isn't Yoda. That I thought for the longest time, totally mistakenly, totally incorrectly, totally thinking that it was literally Baby Yoda. Like Yoda before he grew up and became Yoda as we see him in the first 3 films and in the prequels. And no one that was a fan and had been, because I was really late to the party on Disney Plus. So I was really late to the party on watching this Star Wars content, these newer shows. What is it called? What's not The Mandalorian, but the other show. Not Boba Fett. No, The Mandalorian. Duh. I'm just getting them inside out and backwards. When I watched The Mandalorian, and then, also the interconnection between The Mandalorian and some of the things that happen in Boba Fett. And wherever it is that we see freaking CGI, post-movie Luke Skywalker, which is a whole nother can of worms of things we need to talk about. We need to talk about, retroactively, the Droids cartoon, Caravan of Courage, Ewoks: The Battle for Endor, the story of the Faithful Wookiee, and some of the other weird, like, pre-rebooting, periphery, tertiary content that's out there. I've never even heard of. Star Wars Vintage Clone Wars 2D micro series. I don't know that I've ever even begun to hear about it before. But the drawing style of whoever this character is that's on the cover of this, I think might supposed to be a young Obi-Wan, like in his training days because of the pigtail. But he's making me think of Venture Brothers. Very interesting choice. Very interesting call. Star Wars Rebels shorts. Never heard of it. And the Lego Star Wars stuff. There's content there I've never seen, and haven't even heard of. Star Wars Visions. Totally new. Star Wars Rebels. Not shorts. Star Wars Resistance. I'm literally encountering promotional material for shows I have never even heard of, let alone had the time to watch. So let that factor in however you feel like. Just don't be rude about it. You might be a badass for having seen way more of the second gen and third gen Star Wars cartoon content than I have, but I think my love existed before you were born trumps that. My love for the show existing before you were, a functioning member of society sort of wins if we're going to be, measuring our yin-yangs of street credibility when it comes to who has, street cred on talking smack about Star Wars. And anyways, I do not really like that. I love this stuff, and I look forward to talking about some of the newer things and doing a full-blown revisit. Here it is, Star Wars Timeline Order. According to this list, Star Wars Phantom Menace Episode 1, Star Wars Attack of the Clones Episode 2, Star Wars The Clone Wars, the final season. I don't know how many seasons are involved, but they put at least the final season here. In between the final bit of that tragedy of a trilogy, Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, Episode 3. Then, that was hyper. Then there's Star Wars The Bad Batch. Yeah, again, a series I have heard of, but that I totally had a moment of, it was already late to the party, I had never heard of it, and it was already like people were, done with the party, and I'm like, what is this? It is what it is, folks. Finishing up the timeline reading list, and then we're going to talk about all of this. So, here we go. We got, what was the name of the last one? The Bad Batch. Weird footnote. There's a Jason Momoa movie called The Bad Batch, which is weird and dark and gory and feels really, 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 really fringy and really, 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 really amateurish, but also really, 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 really well made in the end, in the long run. Worth watching. Worth watching again on my own part to refresh my opinion on it. But there it is. Weird crossover tangent. So, continuing with the Star Wars timeline order. Solo, a Star Wars story. Star Wars, Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi, the show that is now dropping in our laps, and we are discussing here. Star Wars Rebels, first time I've heard of it. Rogue One, a Star Wars story. One of the two Star Wars, what I call next-gen movies that I confuse and conflate with each other and get the characters swapped inside out with one another and get all confused. Then, after, obviously, Rogue One is the one with the CGI young Princess Leia, right before the Empire captures R2-D2. Okay? So then, we have Star Wars A New Hope, Episode 4. Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, Episode 5. Star Wars Return of the Jedi, Episode 6. The Mandalorian. Then Star Wars Book of Boba Fett. And that makes sense. Although I didn't really understand how much time. Was it days? Was it weeks? Was it months? Was it years that he was in the pit? Because, I don't know. I thought he was a clone. Is he a clone? Is he a robot? I thought the stormtroopers... I thought Boba Fett was a weird special cadet free ranger stormtrooper. Turns out he's not. I thought Boba Fett was, I guess, a Mandalorian. Turns out he's not. I thought Boba Fett was one of the clones that they based the Clone Wars on. Is he? Isn't he? That show, I watched the entire show, and there was no, other Boba Fett. And there was some stuff in his flashbacks in the very beginning episodes that connected to him from some previous Boba Fett story. But I'm all hazy now. But I digress. Then it was all about the people that I would have thought they would have put Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi in. Right? The grunty, are they robots? Are they aboriginals that just use technology a lot but still have aboriginal lifestyles? grunty, riflemen. They're not Wookiees, but they sound like Wookiees a little bit. Forget what they're called. They're not the Fremen. That's a completely different universe. I digress. Let's finish reading the list. Star Wars Resistance, the cartoon. Star Wars The Force Awakens, episode 7. Right? 5, 6, 7, yeah. Star Wars The Last Jedi, episode 8. Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, episode 9. And there we have it. So that's a good refresher. And I didn't realize, I wasn't sure. I wasn't for dead certain that, I kind of suspected they must have. If the MCU does, then the SWCU must also, given that they're both Disney properties, have this in timeline order listing of all the things. Well, friends, we've built our way into, I am now 60-40 leaning into, okay, maybe I will take up that gauntlet challenge and pick up the glove and slap myself in the face with it and sit down one of these days and start working my way through this entire timeline order. Obvi, not in one sitting, because that's a bazillion too many hours all at once, but spread out over a couple of weeks and or a month or two, not impossible. And totally worth doing as a special sub mini-series of this special feature segment, the Incorrigible Mr. Zeppo's Totally Irrelevant Movie Media Reviews. And now, friends, without further ado, we shall return you to the final bit of fresh, hot take audio recording from last night's viewing of the show in question. Sorry. That was like, I was trying to think of like, if I had to call out the worst thing, what do I think it is? There was something else that I really, really didn't like that I was like, what is this garbage? But I already don't remember. But the shark fish, the sand shark that fell from the sky, and the open air flimsy ass. They're okay. So they're chopping this giant fish down into sushi, right? And they're working it factory line. Now, one would imagine that a ginormous, because this thing was like 7 stories tall, sideways, right? No, 2 stories. Let's go from tip to tip. Its thin wingspan was probably 6 or 7 stories because we had a 3-story, wood structure in front of it to like excavate the flesh out of it. So, problems. Starting with, it's open air. The whole thing's open air. There's some flimsy ass, like, Burning Man decorative bangly bits, sort of, kind of, but open air. So there's sand all over the sushi. Second of all, they were on a factory line, and I don't know anyone out there listening has ever worked a factory line, like at a poultry packing market. I haven't. But I've listened to some people talk about it in the testimonials about certain issues that have come up, and there have been big lawsuits about it and documentaries and whatnot. And I've seen documentary footage. Those things are about efficiency and speed. Why? Because you're trying to cram as much product into packaging and out the door as humanly possible, right? So now we are in a giant space shark, sand, fish, carcass, and the pace at which these sushi, they weren't sushi chefs, they were just like, they were like fish market prep workers. And why, okay, I'm paused here because I'm like, why am I speaking about this with such urgency? That flesh would rot, would go bad, would spoil so fast in the desert, arid, dry winds, right? Tumbling sand everywhere. And one could say, oh, well, the shark skin protects it until they start to carve it. Exactly my point. If you want to preserve, capitalize on, and profit, not profiteer, profit, because there is really a textbook dictionary definition difference between the two words, and we shouldn't conflate them. Profiteering and profiting. I mean, profiting is toxically, potentially corruptible enough. Profiteering is downright maliciously, like intentionally corrupt, and corruption of, spreading of corruption at others. But I digress. If you were going to make a profit in this business, you would not treat the solid gold bars of quickly decaying fish flesh the way they do in this show. And I'm sorry, it's just a lack of thoughtfulness in terms of like, okay, we have a wild idea, flying sand dune shark thing. I don't know if it was supposed to be flying. It feels like it's flying because the way the sand around the body of the shark appeared, it looked like it was in its own, crater of having crash landed. It does not look like it died and was pulled up out of the depths of the sand. Right? That would be completely different layout. And if they meant one and it looked like the other, well, that's just criminally negligent fucking design work there, buddy. But who knows? I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I'm just saying. I had questions about this whole thing. So, I mean, not only was the literal commute part sort of nonsensically not making any sense, and it would have made more sense for him to live not anywhere near that city and not need to get into the city to get home from the fish market, from the fish excavation pit, whatever it was. But the actual depiction of the work, the labor being done, looked as cheesy and fake and staged and not real, despite all the fancy CGI work they did on the meat bits themselves. The fleshy bits almost looked kind of like giant sushi. Almost. Not quite, but almost. Believable giant actual sushi, as if they were trying to, it was a giant red, really red, bright red, virile salmon. Pink red, right? Sort of what the fish on the production table tried to look like. And I'm not criticizing that so much. That was all right. That was great. Whatever. I couldn't do any better. I was talking about the way the scene and the background actors and the pace of the camera work across the stuff, all of it. Just completely detached from what the reality of those kinds of circumstances would really mean and entail in a somewhat believable, somewhat realistic depiction of life in the middle of a sand dune desert that covers an entire planet, right? Like, you would not you would not try to establish an open air sushi kitchen with zero protective features in the middle of the Sahara Desert, on the fringe of the Sahara Desert, and or anywhere else in the world where sandstorms are incredibly likely. And any kind of wind of any level that doesn't need to be sandstorm epic, wind velocities. It can be any bit of a breeze will freaking ruin every piece of fish on your table. It just wouldn't do it that way. And they'd be hustling their asses. And if they were clocking out, they would clock out and they wouldn't just leave the fish sitting there to rot in the sun and heat and sand of the middle of the day, which is weird. Why is it clocking out in the middle of the day? Is it because they got 3 suns and the days are really stupid long? Like, what's going on? No one, like, it was too slapdash, right? Like, it was as cheesy and as hokey and as fake and as not believable as the chocolate factory scene in I Love Lucy, which works for I Love Lucy, a 50s black and white TV show, where none of the machines need to be really real. They just have to be real enough to pass. It might have worked for an episode of Star Trek, like the original generation, before all the acronyms started showing up in the subtitles, right? before the Next Generation rebooted, the rebooting of rebooting Star Trek. Of which I'll be honest with you, and for this, I need your help, dear audience. Should you care to and help me have access to the following, content, I don't have Paramount Plus, and I honestly shouldn't spend the money on it because I'm on the verge of not being able to afford any of this. I'm literally, and have been this entire time, on the verge of no longer being able to afford to produce the podcast itself because it costs me more money than it makes me, even though it's monetized. At least that has been the case. I'm now knocking on wood. It's changing. My numbers are creeping and crawling and exponentially growing, and I seem to be developing a broader and deeper international audience. And for that, I say namaste and thank you, my friends. Not because I think the growth is happening in India, but because I believe in namaste, the word, the greeting, the phrase, the magical terminology. I've even made a meme about it, but I digress. Some of these things, trust me, I'm not a sci-fi hater. I'm writing sci-fi. And thus I feel entitled to comment on about the sci-fi that's made available to us. There's brilliant sci-fi, and then there's hokey-pokey sci-fi. And then there's Star Wars, which is its own special brand of right on the cusp, sometimes crossing over the line, of cheesy, delicious, just goofiness. For some reason, I suddenly had Rod Sterling invading the image in my mind, introducing the Twilight Zone. But I couldn't remember the name of the show, Twilight Zone, for a hot second there. So my brain was like, "What's the name of that show, please?" And I'm like, "Don't put that request in now. We're trying to round this whole thing and bring it home, and I don't need a big, huge derailing thing that distracts me." And thank God I immediately remembered the Twilight Zone. Why is it in my head? I don't know. Forgive me. It just is. Maybe because it's yet another one of those shows, one of the shows on the sort of freakier side, the darker side, the horror-ish, ghoulish side of things that I watched, that I loved. And it represents an easily recognizable cultural marker for a sort of production level that was considered high quality then, but is now laughably simple and not enough today for television now. Although I gotta give it to, what's the other show that does a good job that I just was watching that is not the stewardess or the airline or the whatever the name of that show was? Russian Doll with insert name here of actress, the name I cannot remember, whatever her name is. Please forgive me. Which another actor I completely, totally adore. Oh, I am running out of time. Holy smack. I've only got 7 minutes left, and there's 8 minutes left of audio tape, of videotape. Hold on, I'm going to stop talking. Okay? There was zero ice anywhere at all near the fish chunks in it that I could discern. There were people doing weird things to the blocks, but the blocks never moved down the work line at all. Not once. In the two or three times that we cut to a scene of Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi working so hard in this sweat, these terrible sweatshop factory conditions, cutting sand dune shark sushi. The blocks of meat just sit there. Okay? They just sit there. Open air, exposed to sand, exposed to insects, exposed to flies, exposed to contamination. None of the workers are wearing any kind of protective gear. And as they're in both times, the two or three scenes, they're on the verge of clocking out. And so what happens? The stereotypical retro steam clock whistle thing blows, straight up from the Flintstones cartoons. Woo! And okay, shift's over. And what happens? All of the unprocessed fish sits on these disgusting tables, and everyone walks away. There isn't a second shift coming in. lightning fast to continue the product so that the delicate, quickly decomposing, fresh, raw fish doesn't go bad faster. They just walk away, and we get this lingering shot of Ewan McGregor being the last guy to clock out, and the factory bully pushing everyone around, like having a staring contest, and there's just raw fish sitting there. And in the background, way in the back, at the body of the carcass that they are harvesting, people are still manically like bringing down chunks of new flesh. Nonsense and just cheesy and what they want. I get what the point was. I understand narrative storytelling tropes. Obi-Wan, the true hero of The Force Awakens, or whatever it's called, Episode 3, who sacrifices his entire life at totally the wrong moment, by the way. That's one critique of the original movie. Love the original movie. Stupidest time for Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi to just like give up and let Darth Vader kill him. Dumbest thing in the world. He's responsible for Darth Vader, and that's what he does? Ugh. That one's always bugged me, but I digress. They were trying, in this episode here, they were trying to show Obi-Wan Ben Kenobi going through some sort of dark reversal, right? He's rejected his own identity. He's pretending, he's either deep undercover, which you want to suspect, that he's willingly there undercover as a Jedi, trying to do good, but he seems to really be in like, I fucking gave it all up. I'm not a Jedi. My name is not Obi-Wan. And I guess taking it seriously, and I guess kind of messed up about it emotionally. And they're showing him in the drudgery of his stupid manual labor job. That should have been at a farm, not unlike the farm that Luke grows up on, doing things that they would have actually been doing on that farm. Not in this most impossibly redonkulous sushi factory in the middle of a sandstorm, shit pile, sand dunes desert. Ugh. There, I got it out. The other thing was, similar, related, when he goes to dig up the old lightsabers, he digs like he buried them literally 1.5 feet underground in a sand dune. Do you know how sand dunes work, friends? Dear production designers. I mean, like, I know that this is Star Wars and we don't take the science very seriously. But most movie enthusiasts would know that sand dunes constantly move, constantly shift, and if you bury something like in a sand dune, it will get unburied right quick as the topography of the sand dunes change. So that, like, if it's buried anywhere out there in that desert, under the sand dunes, for it to be secure, it's got to be buried in, like, the actual soil, earth, bedrocky, gravelly dirt rocks underneath the dune part. And you sweep away the dune, and sometimes they move so far, so much, that you hit bedrock and then there's nothing there. And if you didn't bury it down there, then your prize is exposed and easily taken and or moved with the sand. So his little tiny, I'm going to dig for about 15 minutes with a little bit of a tiny time lapse and pull this box that's buried in about as much sand as thick as the box is, laughable. Just sad, bad filmmaking. Like, laughable. Like, what? That would never happen in a sand dune. No one in their right mind would bury important treasure that they want to find again in a sand dune that way. They'd go somewhere where it isn't a sand dune and it's actual earth, and things will grow on it, and so that you can actually dig in a place where it's not going to geologically change in the blink of an eye and or drift the stuff away from you. Okay, enough. Was there anything else I really didn't like? There's plenty of things I did like. Uncle Owen, that is his name, right? Father Owen, Luke's uncle / adoptive parent, brilliantly played by that actor, who does a really great job just being the guy that's like, I just want to take care of this kid and teach him how to take care of the farm because I'm family and I don't know what else. And all you crazy wizards are crazy wizards. And so that was great. And the scene where he does. Okay, we're totally out of time and there's more tape than minutes allowed left. Goodbye. Thank you for listening. I'm going to take a couple days off and I'll catch you on the flip side. Remember to be good humans to one another. May peace, love, and grieviness blossom in your hearts, friends. Peace out.